Three friends who grew up in a London orphanage swore they would be family no matter what. But some bonds don't grow into love with time. They harden into control, into betrayal. When love enters the equation, the past doesn't stay buried, secrets surface, and it's never the right people who burn. 24-year-old Ella Jones lived in a world she trusted, unaware she was standing at the edge of everything she thought was safe. A desire she couldn't control, a love that caught her every time she tried to run, and secrets that surfaced one by one, until the world she knew began to fracture. As everything she believed in fell apart, Ella would find herself standing in the middle of dangers she never chose, but would have to face. And as Rafe Cooper watched Ella from a distance, he already knew the cost of his revenge would reach her too. London nights aren't always bright. Some evenings, the light only serves those inside. The ones left outside choose the dark. Rafe Cooper stood in the shadows, cigarette between his fingers, smoke curling into the cold air. 40 years old, land and construction officially. 8 years among London's wealthiest, the kind of power that made dangerous men kneel and foolish men disappear. Through the window, the pub glowed warm, low voices, quiet laughter, people gathered around wooden tables under amber light, but his eyes tracked only one. Ella Jones. 24, brown hair catching the light, a smile that belonged somewhere safe. She laughed at something her friend said, both hands flying up to cover her mouth, shoulders shaking with the kind of joy that couldn't be faked. Rafe brought the cigarette to his lips and inhaled slow. He could almost taste how untouched she still was. Footsteps approached behind him, measured and familiar, and Max appeared at his shoulder. "Mr. Cooper?" His voice stayed low, eyes already scanning the perimeter. "Car's ready." Rafe Cooper didn't turn. His gaze remained fixed on the girl behind the glass. "When it's just us, Max, drop the formalities." Max stepped closer and followed Rafe's line of sight. His jaw tightened when he saw her. The laughing girl, the easy smile, the complete unawareness of what was coming. "So, this is where it starts?" Rafe flicked the cigarette to the ground and crushed it under his heel. "Everyone destroys what they love, Max." His voice dropped low as he watched her laugh through the glass. "One way or another. And I've waited long enough." He turned and walked toward the waiting car without looking back. Max lingered at the window, eyes on the girl. Something flickered across his face, something that looked almost like pity. Then he squared his shoulders and followed his boss into the dark. 9 a.m. Traffic crawled through central London like it had nowhere to be. Ella Jones sat behind the wheel of her cream Mini Cooper, oat milk flat white in one hand, phone connected to the speakers. Her best friend's voice filled the car, half lecture, half plea. "Ella, seriously, why won't you give Rupert a chance?" Agnes sounded exasperated. "Good family, sweet guy. I saw the way he looked at you last night." Ella took a sip of her coffee and switched lanes, eyes on the road. "You know how my brother gets. Work's been stressing Colin out lately, and for some reason, whenever a guy shows interest in me, he turns into this overprotective nightmare." She let out a breath. "If I start spending time with someone right now, he'll notice, and I really don't want to add to his stress." "Oh my God," Agnes groaned through the speaker. "You sound like you're 15. Ella, you need someone in your life. You're way too inexperienced in this department." Ella's lips curved into a small smile. "I know, but I believe the right person will show up when the time is right." "Ella?" Agnes's voice turned dry. "You're still living in a Jane Austen novel. Meanwhile, London moved on to a Black Mirror episode about 3 seasons ago." Ella laughed, and Agnes joined her, their voices overlapping through the speakers. That's when the impact came, a hard jolt from behind. Her body lurched forward against the seatbelt, and the flat white flew from her hand, splashing across her cream turtleneck and camel trench coat in a spreading stain of brown. "Damn it!" Ella gripped the wheel, heart pounding. "What was that?" Agnes's voice sharpened. "Someone rear-ended me." Ella stared down at her ruined outfit, coffee dripping onto her lap. "I'm already late for the meeting. Can you believe this?" She grabbed her bag, frustration burning in her chest. "I'll call you back." She ended the call and stepped out of the car. The cold morning air hit her face as she turned to inspect the damage. Her rear bumper was cracked, the taillight shattered. Behind her, Minnie sat a black Rolls-Royce, gleaming and untouched, like it had simply nudged a toy out of its way. A man in a dark suit stood by the Rolls, examining the point of impact. The driver. He straightened when she approached, his posture composed, his expression unreadable. "Sir, were you asleep?" Ella kept her voice controlled, though irritation bled through. "What exactly happened back there?" The man inclined his head, apologetic but calm. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We were in a hurry." Ella's shoulders dropped. The fight drained out of her as quickly as it came. "So was I." The rear door of the Rolls-Royce opened. A man stepped out, and everything around Ella seemed to slow. Tall, broad shoulders beneath a charcoal suit that fit like it was sewn onto his body, dark hair, sharp jaw, and eyes the colour of frozen water, ice blue, cutting through the grey London morning. He moved toward her with the kind of walk that made people step aside without being asked. Ella's spine straightened. Her fingers swept her long brown hair back from her face, tucking it behind her ear. Her throat tightened. A strange warmth spread beneath her collarbone, and she became suddenly aware of her own breathing, too shallow, too quick. He was striking, magnetic even. But something in the way he carried himself, cold, assessing, faintly superior, made her skin prickle with unease. "I apologize." His voice was low, unhurried. "My driver had a momentary lapse in attention." He glanced past her at the Mini Cooper's cracked bumper, then back at her coffee-stained coat. His hand reached into his jacket and produced a silk handkerchief. "For your clothes as well. I'm sorry." Ella didn't take it. "I was on my way to an important meeting. Now I'll have to walk in looking like this thanks to you." The corner of his mouth lifted. Barely. "You did break rather suddenly. Perhaps more caution next time." Ella blinked. "Excuse me?" Heat crept up her neck. "You hit me. And now you're blaming me?" He stepped closer. One step. That was all it took to close the distance between them, and suddenly he was right there, inches away, those pale blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Up close, she could see the faint scar near his left eyebrow, the sharpness of his cheekbones. His gaze didn't waver. It pinned her in place, unhurried, like he had all the time in the world to study her face. Her cheeks burned. She couldn't explain why. "My driver is very experienced." His voice dropped, almost intimate. "How long have you been driving in London traffic? 2 years? 3? Ella lifted her chin. 5 years. And I've never hit anyone." That half-smile again, curling at the edge of his lips. "Clearly, you inspire others to do it for you." Her mouth fell open. "You're unbelievable. It's not just the suit. Your words are just as arrogant." He didn't flinch. If anything, his smile deepened by a fraction, and something flickered in his eyes. Interest, maybe. Or amusement. She couldn't tell which was worse. Ella turned and looked at her cracked bumper one more time. Her pulse was racing now, though she refused to acknowledge why. "You know what? I don't need to waste another second on this." She reached for her car door. "I don't need your money. I don't need you to pay for the damage. I'm late, and I'm leaving." She slid into the driver's seat and slammed the door. Horns blared behind them, other drivers losing patience with the blocked lane. "What an insufferable man," she muttered under her breath, jamming the key into the ignition. The engine hummed to life. She pulled away without looking back, merging into traffic with more force than necessary, but her face was still flushed, her heart still hammered against her ribs. His eyes, that voice, the way he'd stood so close, like the space between them, meant nothing. She tightened her grip on the wheel and told herself it was just the adrenaline. But 3 blocks later, she still couldn't shake him from her mind. Ella rushed through the lobby of Crownstone property with her heels clicking against marble, and the elevator couldn't move fast enough. She checked her reflection in the mirrored doors. Coffee stain still visible on her cream turtleneck, hair slightly out of place, cheeks flushed from running. And this was not how she wanted to start the day. The doors opened on the executive floor, and Colin was already waiting in the hallway with his arms crossed and tension carved into his shoulders. "Ella, sweetheart, where have you been?" His voice was tight, his eyes scanning her face. "The meeting starts in 5 minutes. We're about to meet our new investor, and you know I specifically asked you to come early." Then his gaze dropped to the stain on her coat, and he shook his head slowly, a familiar look crossing his face, half exasperation, half affection. "Still, my little sister, you're never going to grow up, are you?" Ella's jaw tightened. "Colin, I'm almost 25, and I am responsible." She smoothed her coat with frustration bleeding into her voice. "Someone rear-ended me on the way here and the coffee spilled. It wasn't my fault." Colin's expression shifted instantly, and his hands found her shoulders, sudden concern flooding his features. "Hey, are you okay? Did something happen to you? Are you hurt?" "I'm fine." Ella placed her hand over his. "Nothing happened. I'm fine." He held her gaze for a moment longer, searching her face, then nodded and released her. They walked together toward the conference room, and Ella matched his pace while lowering her voice. "So, we have a new partner. What's his name?" Colin pushed open the glass door. "Rafe Cooper." Inside, 10 members of the management team sat around the long table, and Ella was the youngest in the room by at least a decade. The family seat, Colin called it. He wanted her trained and prepared, ready to take on real responsibility someday, though for now she mostly observed. She settled into the chair beside her brother. "Rich, I assume?" "Very." Colin's voice dropped as he leaned closer. "Wealthy, powerful connections. But there's something off about him. A darker edge." Ella frowned. "Then why did you accept him as an investor?" Colin's lips brushed near her ear. "We didn't have a choice. You know the financial trouble we've been in. He came with a strong offer." He straightened, eyes fixed on the door. "But we'll keep him at arm's length as much as possible." Before Ella could respond, the conference room door swung open and the air left her lungs. The man who walked in wore a charcoal suit that fit like armor, with a sharp jaw, dark hair, and those eyes, ice blue and cutting across the room like they owned every inch of it. He moved with the kind of confidence that didn't ask for attention but simply took it. Ella's stomach dropped. It was him. The arrogant stranger from the street, the one who'd hit her car and blamed her for it, the one whose gaze had pinned her in place like she was something to be studied. Everyone at the table rose to their feet, but Ella stayed frozen in her chair, her mind spinning. "Oh my God," she breathed, the words barely audible. Mr. Arrogance. What were the odds? What were the actual odds of this happening? Colin stepped forward and extended his hand. "Mr. Cooper, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person." Rafe Cooper's gaze settled on Colin's face, and he didn't move immediately. His eyes held Colin's for several long seconds, measuring, assessing, revealing nothing, and then, slowly, he extended his hand. "Mr. Jones," his voice was smooth and unhurried, "likewise." Their hands met, and the handshake lasted a beat too long. Something cold passed between them, invisible but unmistakable, and Ella watched her brother's posture stiffen, watched the slight narrowing of his eyes. Rafe released his grip first. "I reviewed Crownstone Property thoroughly before reaching out, a solid company going through difficult times." His lips curved, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "I decided to offer my support." Colin's brow furrowed. "Support? I don't have much time today." Rafe moved toward the table, unbuttoning his jacket as he sat. "Let's meet the team, review the documents, and sign." His gaze swept the room and landed on Ella. She turned her head sharply, biting down on her lower lip as heat flooded her face. She could feel his attention like a physical weight pressing against her skin. Rafe opened the contract folder in front of him and scanned the pages, then closed it and set his pen on the table with deliberate precision. "I have conditions." The room went still. "Without these additions, I won't sign." Colin's voice tightened. "Conditions? The agreement is already. I want a detailed audit of the company's last 10 years. Rafe's tone remained calm, almost casual. "Every project, every partnership, every financial transaction." Colin's expression hardened. "That's not a standard investor request." Rafe lifted his gaze and met Colin's eyes directly. I'm not a standard investor. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. I'm not finished. Rafe continued without waiting for a response. I'll require veto rights on all major projects, financing decisions, loan usage, subcontractor selection, land acquisitions. All of it will need my prior approval. Colin leaned back slowly, his fingers pressing against the table's edge. So, you're not joining my company as a partner. You're moving inside it. That half smile again, cold and controlled. That's how you enter companies going through hard times. Ella's gaze flickered to Rafe without permission, and he caught it. She looked away, her pulse pounding in her ears. Colin exhaled through his nose. What you're describing is operational control. Yes. Rafe didn't hesitate, and he picked up his pen again, tapping it against a specific clause in the contract. Add this, and I sign. Refuse, and we pretend this meeting never happened. The air in the room felt heavier now, and no one spoke. No one moved. Ella watched her brother's shoulders drop, watched the tension drain into something heavier. Defeat, maybe, or resignation. Her chest tightened at the sight, because she had never seen Colin look like this, so cornered, so small. Colin lifted his head. Fine. The word came out flat, stripped of resistance. He stood and extended his hand across the table. We'll revise the terms and present them for your signature. Rafe rose slowly, his gaze dropping to Colin's outstretched hand. He didn't take it. Instead, he stepped closer and placed his hand on Colin's shoulder. The gesture looked friendly, but it wasn't. We'll shake after I sign. His voice was soft, almost pleasant. I'll be here tomorrow morning at 9. Have a room prepared for me. He turned and walked toward the door, his footsteps measured and unhurried, and at the threshold, he paused. He looked back over his shoulder, directly at Ella. Their eyes met, and his lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Then he was gone. Ella stared at the empty doorway with her brother's slumped shoulders visible in the corner of her eye. She didn't fully understand what had just happened. Not really. But one thing was already clear. She couldn't stand Rafe Cooper. The parking garage was quiet at 6 p.m., most of the office already gone, and Ella's heels echoed against the concrete as she made her way toward her car. Hey, Ella, wait up! She turned to find James Donalds jogging toward her, his tie loosened and his jacket slung over one arm. At 33, James was Crownstone's head of acquisitions, charming, sharp, the kind of rising talent that made senior executives nervous. He fell into step beside her with an easy smile. How's it going? That meeting was something, huh? You could say that. Ella shifted her bag on her shoulder. What did you think of the new investor? Honestly? James shoved his free hand into his pocket. Colin took a risk. Guy doesn't exactly scream trustworthy. No. Ella shook her head slowly. He doesn't. Think he'll show up to Surrey Hills next week, the annual retreat? James glanced at her. He already demanded an office in the building. Doesn't sound like someone who plans to just write checks and disappear. Probably not. Ella let out a breath. He'll want to be part of everything. James laughed shortly. Great. Team bonding with the mystery investor. Ella smiled. James, you're fishing. If you want answers, ask my brother. He'll tell you more than I ever could. She gestured back toward the building. I sit in that chair, but Colin keeps me as far from the real decisions as possible. She glanced at him. But if the company's struggling so much, why are we still doing Surrey? Shouldn't we be cutting costs? James made an exaggerated sweeping gesture with his arm. Image, Ella. Image is everything in this business. He grinned. We're Crownstone. We need to look strong if we want to keep winning contracts and land deals. Image is everything in life, Ella said dryly. Isn't it? They reached her Mini Cooper and stopped, and James turned to face her, his expression shifting into something more direct. Ella, I like you. No preamble, no games. You know that by now. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, or maybe uncertainty, and she opened her mouth to respond, but he held up a hand. "I'm not asking for anything. I know Colin's protective, especially right now." His lips curved. "But save me the first dance at Surrey, that's all." Ella let out a soft laugh. "We'll see, James." He grinned and started backing toward his own car across the lot, calling over his shoulder as he went. "First dance is mine, Ella. Don't forget." She watched him go, shaking her head with a small smile, then turned toward her car and glanced at the rear bumper, another repair job to deal with. But she stopped mid-step. The bumper wasn't cracked anymore, the taillight wasn't shattered. The whole thing looked brand new, like this morning had never happened. Ella moved closer and ran her fingers along the smooth surface, her brow furrowing as she crouched down to inspect it. "What the?" she murmured. "Someone fixed my car?" That's when she noticed the small card tucked into the edge of the bumper. She pulled it free and read the handwritten words. "No more damage. Accept my apology." No signature. No name. Ella stared at the note, her mind working through the possibilities. Colin? But if Colin had done it, he would have told her, would have made a whole thing about taking care of his little sister. He wouldn't leave an anonymous note asking for forgiveness. She slid into the driver's seat with the card still in her hand, her thoughts refusing to settle as she pulled out of the garage and merged into evening traffic. If not Colin, then who? Who else even knew about the accident? And then it clicked. Rafe Cooper. The realization sent a strange current through her chest, and suddenly she couldn't stop seeing him, those ice-blue eyes cutting through the grey morning, that mocking half-smile, the way he'd stepped so close she could feel the warmth radiating off his skin. "Great," she muttered, gripping the wheel harder. "The walking definition of every man you should never get involved with, Ella." Arrogant. Controlling. The kind who thought money could fix anything. But even as she listed the reasons, something flickered beneath her ribs. Unwanted. Uninvited. She shook her head and exhaled sharply. "Get out of my head, damn it!" The city lights blurred past her window, and she told herself it meant nothing, but her fingers were still holding the note. Ella was late again, but she didn't regret it. The children at St. Mary's Orphanage had waited all week for her visit, and she wasn't about to disappoint them. Not for a meeting, not for anything. She'd brought picture books this time, the kind with bright covers and happy endings. Her parents had died when she was 2, and Colin, only 18 at the time, hadn't been able to take custody. He'd spent 2 years in the system before aging out, while Ella remained 6 years longer, cycling through foster homes until Colin finally brought her home. She didn't remember much of that time, just fragments. Cold hallways, too many faces, loneliness like a weight on her chest. Her real memories started later, with Colin and his wife Isabel, with birthday cakes and someone finally showing up when they said they would. But she never let herself forget where she came from. The elevator doors opened on the executive floor, and Ella stepped out, already rehearsing her excuse for being late. That's when she saw him. Through the glass-walled conference room, Rafe Cooper stood with 2 men, all of them studying a laptop screen. Even from across the floor, his presence shifted the air. "Morning," James appeared at her side. "You just missed the signing." Ella gestured toward the glass room. "So the deal went through." "Our new investor didn't waste time." James sipped his coffee. "Already running audits?" Ella watched Rafe through the glass for a moment longer, then turned and walked toward Colin's office. Her brother was on the phone when she entered, pacing behind his desk with the receiver pressed to his ear. "Yes, I understand. The transfer cleared this morning. We'll have the documents by end of day." He caught her eye and smiled, then wrapped up the call and set the phone down. Ella crossed her arms. "So, he's going to be here now? Permanently?" Colin reached out and squeezed her shoulder. "Sometimes. But don't worry, the money's in the accounts. We can finally breathe." Ella glanced at the glass conference room, still visible from where she stood. "But we're not getting rid of him." Colin's smile turned knowing. "You never know." Ella left his office and headed toward her own, but the path took her past the conference room again, and this time, Rafe was alone. She hesitated for half a second, then kept walking. She wasn't going to look like she was running from him. He was on the phone, but the moment she passed the glass door, he stopped mid-sentence. "I'll call you back." He ended the call and turned, his gaze locking onto hers. Ella stopped at the threshold but didn't step inside. "Hello. Welcome to the company. I'm Ella Jones." The corner of his mouth lifted. "Hello again." "Last night," she said, tilting her head slightly, "I found something strange in the parking garage. My bumper was magically repaired, like the accident never happened." Rafe moved toward her, closing the distance with 2 slow steps. "Interesting." His voice dropped lower. Maybe time rewound itself. A chance for a better beginning. Ella's pulse quickened, but she held her ground. "That's an unexpectedly kind gesture, Mr. Cooper." He took another step, and now he was close enough that she could smell him. Vetiver and something darker, spice and warmth, a masculine amber note that seemed to wrap around her senses. His hand came up and rested against the glass door frame beside her head, not quite caging her in, but making it impossible to ignore how little space remained between them. "Unexpectedly kind, huh?" he murmured, a hint of mockery in his voice. His eyes searched her face. "Do you think you know me, Ella?" Her skin felt too tight, and warmth spread through her chest like honey dissolving in hot water. She opened her mouth to respond. "Ella." Colin's voice cut through the moment like a blade. She stepped back, her cheeks flushed. "Excuse me." She walked toward her brother, but halfway there, she glanced back over her shoulder and found his gaze still fixed on her, steady and unreadable. She bit down on her lower lip and kept moving. Colin fell into step beside her, his voice dropping low. "Stay away from him. Something about that man doesn't sit right. Don't let him get close." Ella slipped her arm through his. "Don't worry, Colin. I can take care of myself." But as they walked, his scent still lingered, vetiver and spice and amber, mysterious and dangerous. And she couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd said her name. That same night, in a Hampstead mansion that appeared on no public records, Rafe Cooper celebrated his new partnership with the only person who mattered. Aidan Palmer stood before the fireplace with a whiskey glass in his hand, the flames casting shifting light across his face, while the rest of the room remained deliberately dark. At 62, he was a man whose name made powerful people nervous, a figure who never appeared in photographs, never gave interviews, never needed to prove anything to anyone. Some called him London's modern-faced mafia. Others called him a respected businessman with impressive political connections. Both descriptions were true, and neither came close to the whole story. He didn't turn around when he spoke, his voice barely louder than the crackling fire. "I'm a man who has everything, Rafe." He swirled the amber liquid slowly. "And nothing left to lose." His shoulders shifted almost imperceptibly. "But you're different." Rafe sat in the leather armchair directly across from where Aidan stood, and he leaned forward with his forearms resting on his knees, the firelight illuminating half his face while the other half disappeared into shadow. "You're the closest thing I have to a father, Aidan. You know I have nothing to lose either." His voice was low, controlled. "I've waited 15 years for this day to come. The fire of revenge has been burning inside me all this time." He paused, and something ancient and patient moved behind his eyes. "I'm here because of you. I'm alive because of you." Aidan lifted his gaze from the flames and turned to study him, completely still except for his eyes, the way a chess master reads the board 3 moves ahead. Then he crossed the room with measured steps and lowered himself into the chair opposite Rafe, close enough that their knees nearly touched. "A man's fate is the sum of his choices, son." He set his glass on the small table between them. "When you decide to return the evil that was done to you, you must be absolutely certain you have nothing left to lose." His grey-blue eyes sharpened. "Revenge doesn't let you choose what you take. It makes you choose what you sacrifice." Rafe's fingers pressed together, knuckles whitening briefly before relaxing. "I already sacrificed my identity. The man I used to be is dead." His voice carried no emotion. I'm Rafe Cooper now. That's all that matters. Aidan tilted his head, and something unreadable passed across his weathered features, concern, perhaps, or a warning. And what if this journey brings you to someone you hesitate to sacrifice? The question settled between them like smoke, heavy with implication. Rafe held the older man's gaze without flinching, without breathing, without revealing anything at all. No. The word came out flat, final. That won't happen. Aidan watched him for a long moment, then nodded once and reached for his glass. How do you plan to proceed? Rafe leaned back in his chair and rotated his own whiskey glass between his palms, watching the amber liquid catch the firelight. I'll slow the cash flow. Loans will be delayed. Subcontractor payments will sit in limbo. The ghost of a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Projects won't stop. But they won't move forward either. You'll bring him down before he realizes what's happening. Aidan's voice carried a note of approval, but his eyes remained watchful. However, remember this. If you want to truly know your enemy, give him power. Watch what he does with it. Rafe turned the glass one more time, then lifted his gaze to meet Aidan's. I've known my enemy since childhood, Aidan. The fire crackled in the silence that followed, and neither man spoke, but somewhere in the shadows of that room, 15 years of patience had finally begun to move. After Rafe left, Aidan remained by the fire, watching shadows dance across the walls of the Hampstead mansion while whiskey caught amber light in his glass. His phone rang, and Max's name appeared on the screen. He's moving faster than we anticipated. Max's voice came through the speaker. The girl, Ella Jones, she's already under his skin, whether he sees it or not. Aidan swirled his drink, watching the flames. I saw it tonight, the way he said her name. His voice stayed soft. He thinks he's in control. He's wrong. Danny Kane's asking questions again, about Colin Jones, about the warehouse 15 years ago. He's getting close to the truth. How close? Close enough to be a problem. He wants blood for his father's death. Aidan moved to the window. Keep him contained, away from Rafe, away from the girl. Understood. What happens if Rafe chooses her over the revenge? Aidan's breath fogged the glass. Then maybe I didn't fail him completely. And if he destroys her? Max's voice dropped. Uses that innocent girl to satisfy 15 years of hate? Aidan was quiet, his reflection staring back, an old man's face, lined with choices that couldn't be unmade. Then, I'll do what needs to be done. Soft, but certain. One way or another. He ended the call and returned to his chair. Outside, London breathed and lived, and inside, a man who'd built an empire on violence did something rare. He hoped that the man he'd raised would choose differently, that love would prove stronger than hate, that Ella Jones would save Rafe Cooper before revenge crushed them both. Because Aidan Palmer had everything. And only one weakness in the world. The man he'd raised from broken pieces. The only person he'd ever called son. And that was why, if it came to it, he'd be the one to end it. Because sometimes love looked like mercy, and sometimes mercy required letting go, even if letting go meant blood. Sunday mornings at the Kensington Spa Centre belonged to Ella Jones. She stood at the edge of the heated pool with her white robe pulled at her feet, wearing nothing but a black swimsuit with thin straps that crossed her back, breathing in the warm, chlorine-tinged air while steam curled off the surface like something alive. Barely 6 in the morning. No voices, no splashing, no one watching. Just the hum of the filtration system and the faint blue glow of underwater lights reflecting off the ceiling. This was her church, her private proof that the girl who once nearly died in water could choose to enter it on her own terms. At 6 years old, still cycling through foster homes, she'd fallen into a river during a group outing and gone under before anyone noticed. The water had swallowed her whole, cold, brown, merciless, and her lungs had filled with something that wasn't air. A counsellor dragged her out by the collar, and she'd vomited river water onto the bank while the other children stared. Nobody held her while she cried. She hadn't gone near water for 19 years, But last year, something stubborn had risen inside her, and she'd walked into this building with shaking hands. Now she came every Sunday at dawn, and each time she lowered herself into the pool, she whispered, "You survived. You're allowed to live." She curled her fingers around the cool metal ladder when movement caught her eye on the far side of the pool. A man in a white robe, his back turned to her, broad shoulders tapering to a narrow waist. He untied the robe and let it slide down his arms, revealing the carved landscape of his back, a black boxer-style swimsuit sitting low on his hips. Her fingers tightened around the railing. No one was ever here at this hour. Then he turned around. Her stomach dropped. Ice-blue eyes found hers across the steam-hazed distance, and her body recognized him before her mind caught up. That sharp jaw, dark hair falling damp across his forehead. He held her gaze for a beat too long, then started walking toward her along the pool's edge with quiet authority that made the distance between them feel like it was shrinking with every step. Rafe Cooper. Her grip slipped. The metal rail turned slick beneath her palm, and her body pitched forward, ankle twisting as her foot slid off the wet tile. She hit the water sideways hard, and then she was under, not stepping in, not choosing, not in control. Falling, the way she'd fallen into that river 20 years ago. That was what broke her, not the water. She swam in this pool every week. But the feeling of the surface closing over her head without permission, the sudden helplessness of a body that wouldn't obey. Her muscles locked as logic fled, leaving only instinct, leaving only the 6-year-old girl thrashing in brown water while the sky disappeared. Then strong arms wrapped around her waist and pulled. She broke the surface, coughing, gasping, pressed flush against a chest that radiated heat even through the water. His arm locked around her waist, while his other hand pushed the wet hair from her face with a gentleness that didn't match anything else about him. When she blinked the chlorine from her eyes, his face was right there, inches away, close enough to count the lashes framing those impossible blue eyes. "Easy." His voice was low and unhurried, as if they had all the time in the world. "I've got you, Ella. Just breathe." Her name in his mouth, the warmth of his breath on her wet skin, the solid width of his chest beneath her trembling palms. Warmth spread through her like honey, and her body hummed with an awareness that had nothing to do with drowning. She shoved against his chest, hard. "Let go of me." She pushed backward until her spine hit the pool wall. "I'm fine. I know how to swim." He released her immediately, but those eyes stayed on her face. "You fell hard and didn't come up for a few seconds." She pressed her shoulders against the tile, willing her body to stop remembering the shape of his hands on her waist. "It was just an uncontrolled fall. I don't have great memories with water, and when I went under like that—" She swallowed. "I panicked." Something moved behind his expression. Not pity, something more careful, and he nodded once before swimming to the ladder and pulling himself out in a single fluid motion. She tried not to watch. She failed. Water sluiced down his torso, running along the ridges of his stomach and the line of dark hair that disappeared beneath his waistband, and goosebumps rose across her arms that had nothing to do with cold. He turned and held out his hand, water still dripping from his fingertips. "Come on, out." She bit her lower lip, then took his hand. His grip was firm and warm and over too quickly. He held out a towel and she wrapped it around herself like armor. He stood in front of her, soaking wet and completely at ease, his gaze traveling down to her legs for half a second before snapping back to her face. Then he moved. Before she could react, his hands closed around her waist and he lifted her onto the high stone alcove, set into the wall as if she weighed nothing. The suddenness stole her breath, and she found herself sitting above him, towel slipping, heart hammering. "What are you doing?" The words came out barely above a whisper. He took her bare foot and placed it flat against his chest, and her mind went blank. His skin was warm and damp beneath her sole, and she could feel his heartbeat, steady, slow, pulsing against the arch of her foot, so different from the chaos inside her own ribs. His fingers wrapped around her ankle, and awareness sharpened every sensation to almost pain. "Your ankle twisted when you fell." His thumb found the sore spot and pressed, firm, careful, and he began working the joint with slow, circular strokes. "It'll swell shut if we don't handle it now." Her lips went dry. She was still damp from the pool, but her skin felt too tight, too sensitive, as if every nerve ending had migrated to the place where his hands met her skin. "I'm fine." She tried to pull her foot back. "Let go." He didn't. "If we don't bring the swelling down, you won't walk tomorrow." His eyes lifted to hers and the corner of his mouth curved, "Though I didn't expect you to be this excited to see me." "Excited?" She gripped the edge of the ledge. "I've been coming here for a year. No one is ever here at this hour. I don't like swimming when there are people around." His smile widened. "Social phobia?" She yanked her foot away. "Hygiene." He raised both hands in surrender. "Fair enough. I'm sorry." She dropped her gaze from his body because looking at all that wet skin was doing something dangerous to her ability to think. "What are you even doing here, Mr. Cooper? I've never seen you before." He began drying himself with the same unhurried ease he brought to everything. "I've been coming every Sunday for 6 months. Didn't sleep well last night, so I came early." He draped the towel around his neck. "Turns out fate has its own methods." She jumped down from the ledge, towel wrapped tight. "I should go." "Let me buy you a coffee." He took one step forward. "Or matcha. I'll have something at home. Thanks." She turned and walked toward the changing room, fast, deliberate, refusing to look back, even though something in her chest pulled like a fishhook. Stay. Have coffee. Find out what his voice sounds like when he laughs. She fought the thought with every step, and by the time she pushed through the door, she was almost proud of herself for walking away. Almost, because her skin still burned where his fingers had circled her ankle, and the steady rhythm of his heartbeat against the sole of her foot followed her all the way home. London passed in streaks of rain-smeared grey through the tinted windows of the Mercedes. Rafe sat in the back seat, collar open, hair still damp from the spa, watching the city blur past without seeing any of it. Max drove with both hands on the wheel, but his eyes kept drifting to the rear-view mirror, reading, calculating, waiting. The Ella Jones file. Rafe's voice carried no inflection. "Anything worth knowing?" Max adjusted the mirror and studied Rafe's reflection the way a man studies weather before deciding whether to leave the house. King's College London, business management, near the top of her class. He changed lanes with quiet precision. No criminal record, not even a parking ticket. The kind of clean that isn't an act. Rafe nodded once, his thumb tracing a slow line through the condensation on his window. "Social life?" "Small circle from university. Keeps them at arm's length." Max stopped at a light. "No romantic relationships, current or past. Colin runs her world like a closed compound." He glanced at the mirror again. "And every month she visits St. Mary's orphanage, brings gifts, reads to the kids, stays until they push her out." His warm brown eyes found Rafe's. "Orphans, Rafe." "She's a good girl." The professional distance had left Max's voice entirely. Rafe held his gaze in the mirror, then turned back to the rain-streaked glass. 3 blocks passed before Max tried again. "You said you'd leave her out of this. Isabel was the path." Rafe's jaw tightened. He knew what he'd told Aidan. He knew the plan. "But she stood at that pool this morning. I watched her fall. My body was in the water before my brain gave the order." His fingers curled against his thigh. Max said nothing. His grip tightened on the wheel, knuckles whitening. Behind Rafe's closed eyes the image arrived, her face breaking the surface, water streaming through dark hair, while those wide hazel eyes found his, and stayed. The trembling architecture of her body against his chest, the impossible delicacy of her ankle cradled in his palm, her pulse fluttering through her skin. Ella Jones. Her name left his lips against the window, barely more than breath, and filled the car like something he hadn't meant to say out loud. Max watched him through the rearview mirror and turned onto Kensington High Street without a word. 2 hours later, the dining room in Colin's Kensington mansion smelled of fresh coffee and warm maple syrup. Late morning sunlight pooled across the marble table where Sunday brunch lay in comfortable disarray. Colin sat at the head scrolling through his tablet, already somewhere else. Isabel occupied the chair across from Ella, blonde hair swept into a casual twist, green eyes bright. "You could do worse than James, Ella," She reached for the butter dish, her gaze sliding toward Colin. "Your brother would build a wall around you if he could." Ella laughed and wrapped both hands around her tea. "That's not even an exaggeration." Isabel leaned closer, lowering her voice. "You've never even been kissed, Ella. At almost 25, that's not normal." The words landed somewhere Ella wasn't prepared for. She lifted her cup, using the motion to buy herself a second. "Living with Colin makes trusting men nearly impossible. I can't even talk to someone my age without wanting to scream." She turned the cup in her hands. "Why are they all so immature? Was Colin like that when he was young?" Colin's phone buzzed. He stood and disappeared down the hallway. Isabel watched him go, something behind her expression rearranging itself. She turned back to Ella, and the composure reassembled. "Absolutely. Men take twice as long to grow up." Ella reached for another pancake. "How long have you two been together? I've lived with you for 10 years and barely know anything about before that." Curiosity sharpened her gaze. "How did you know he was the one?" She leaned forward. "Was there someone before Colin?" Isabel's hand moved toward her teacup with deliberate grace. She lifted it, took a slow sip, and set it back with precision. "There was." Her gaze drifted somewhere the Sunday light couldn't follow. "But he died." Ella's fork stilled halfway to her plate. "My God, Isabel, I had no idea." Isabel lifted one shoulder in a gesture meant to look casual. "Almost 15 years ago. Then your brother came into my life." The air between them had thinned somehow. "Did Colin know him?" Ella asked carefully. "Yes." Isabel traced the rim of her cup with one finger. "He knew him well. The three of us grew up together." She paused. "We were all at the same orphanage." Ella leaned back. Colin's sealed past, the questions he deflected, the walls he'd built, all of it rearranged itself in her mind. "Isabel, there's so much I had no idea about." Isabel studied her, then slid another pancake onto Ella's plate. "Enough ancient history." Her smile returned, practiced and bright. "Spend the weekend at Surrey Hills with James. I promise he's nothing like the immature 24-year-olds you've been suffering through." Ella laughed, and the tension dissolved. But later, standing alone in the kitchen with warm water running over her hands, her mind circled back. He died. 3 friends from the same orphanage, and one of them gone, 15 years buried, never mentioned. The way Isabel had said it kept replaying in her head. Too careful, too practiced. Like a story she'd told herself so many times she'd almost started to believe it. The week passed in slow motion. Ella found herself walking past the glass-walled office more often than necessary, carrying files she didn't need to deliver, taking routes that made no sense. Each time she glanced through the transparent walls, the space sat empty. No dark suits, no ice-blue eyes, no presence that made the air feel thinner. Rafe Cooper hadn't set foot in the building all week. Wednesday afternoon, she sat at her desk staring at a spreadsheet that refused to make sense. Her mind kept pulling her back to Sunday morning, his hands at her waist, her ankle cradled against his chest, those ice-blue eyes holding hers. Heat flooded her face without warning. She pressed her palms flat against the desk, trying to anchor herself back to the present. It didn't help. Her skin remembered the exact pressure of his fingers at her waist, the way his other hand had steadied her knee. She unbuttoned her collar with fingers that weren't quite steady, then forced her attention back to the keyboard. She typed before she could talk herself out of it. Rafe Cooper, London. The search results loaded. Not much. A side profile photograph from some charity gala, a business opening, another event, all within the past 8 years, nothing before that. Like he'd materialized fully formed 8 years ago and started writing checks. She clicked through 3 pages of results before finding something more substantial. A column from one of London's cultural blogs, tucked in the business section. The byline belonged to someone she didn't recognize, but the headline made her pulse quicken. New money, old shadows. Who is Rafe Cooper? Rafe Cooper has made waves in London's investment circles over the past 8 years, but the man himself remains frustratingly opaque. What is known, Cooper maintains close ties to Aidan Palmer, whose name carries considerable weight in both European business circles and certain political corridors better left unexamined. Cooper himself rarely appears at social functions, guards his privacy with legendary intensity, and seems to prefer operating from the shadows rather than the spotlight. Ella leaned back in her chair. The name Aidan Palmer meant nothing to her, but the way the article described him made her pulse quicken. She closed the browser tab and stared at her reflection in the darkened screen. Why couldn't she stop thinking about him? Why did every day without seeing him feel like waiting for something she couldn't name? The office felt too small suddenly, too warm. Friday afternoon brought grey skies and the promise of rain. Ella sat in the back seat of Colin's Mercedes, arms crossed, watching Surrey Hills appear through the windshield in patches of green between the trees. "I still don't understand why you wouldn't let me drive myself." She kept her voice level, but frustration leaked through anyway. "You seat me next to you in meetings. You introduce me as part of the executive team, then you drive me to conferences like I'm 12. Isabel turned from the passenger seat, blonde hair catching the light, green eyes dancing with barely suppressed amusement. "Sweetheart, you practically are our child. We raised you." "Then let me leave the nest." Ella leaned forward. "I'm 24. I'm trying to build a career. How is anyone supposed to take me seriously when my brother treats me like someone precious who needs protecting?" Colin's eyes found hers in the rearview mirror, softening at the edges. "We take you very seriously, Ella. That's why I want you close this weekend." His smile turned sharper. "And if anyone at the hotel gets ideas about approaching you tonight, you know exactly what to do." Isabel swatted his shoulder. "Colin, stop. The girl needs a boyfriend eventually. You scare off every man who comes within 10 feet of her. I haven't met anyone who deserves her yet." Colin turned up the radio, some classical piece that filled the car with strings, and accelerated smoothly through a curve in the tree-lined road. Ella watched the woods blur past and tried to ignore the tightness in her chest, tried not to think about ice-blue eyes and hands that had touched her with impossible gentleness, tried not to wonder where he was right now, what he was doing, whether he ever thought about Sunday morning, whether he remembered holding her at all. The Mercedes rolled through Surrey Hills' winding roads, past estates hidden behind stone walls and ancient oaks. Isabel hummed along with the radio. Colin's fingers drummed against the steering wheel. The afternoon light slanted golden through the leaves. None of them had any idea how quickly everything was about to change. How close danger had already come. How the weekend ahead would crack their world open and reveal all the beautiful, terrible things hiding underneath. The hotel suite's marble bathtub held water hot enough to sting. Ella sank deeper into the foam, trying to force her muscles to relax, but her mind refused to cooperate. Would he come tonight? The thought arrived without invitation and refused to leave. Rafe Cooper. Ice-blue eyes. That infuriating way he looked at her, like he could see through every carefully constructed wall she'd built. Why couldn't she stop thinking about him? Especially when Colin had spent the entire week in foul moods, muttering about investment contracts and overstepping boundaries, and that arrogant bastard demanding access to files he has no business seeing. She pressed her palms against her temples and sank lower until the water touched her chin. This was ridiculous. He was rude, cold, presumptuous, and her skin still remembered exactly where his hands had touched. She climbed out of the bath with more force than necessary and wrapped herself in the hotel's thick white robe. The dress hanging on the closet door caught her eye, a white silk gown she'd chosen with more care than the occasion required. Simple, elegant, the kind of dress that didn't try too hard but somehow managed to command attention anyway. Why did you pack this one? She ignored the question and started on her hair. 20 minutes later, she stood before the mirror in the white dress, makeup subtle but perfect, dark hair swept up to expose her shoulders. She looked like someone who belonged at events like this, confident, composed, nothing like the mess of contradictions currently tangled up inside her chest. She grabbed her clutch and left the room before she could change her mind. The grand ballroom of Surrey Hills estate sprawled beneath crystal chandeliers that threw diamond-cut patterns across marble floors, Company employees in evening wear clustered in small groups, champagne glasses catching the light. The annual Crowstone gathering, Colin's tradition, named for the company's foundation stone, a night of toasts and dancing and carefully orchestrated networking. Ella descended the staircase, one hand trailing along the banister, scanning the room out of habit. The stage at the far end held a small orchestra tuning their instruments. Round tables draped in cream linen surrounded a polished dance floor. She found their table near the front, prime position as always. Isabel sat already, stunning in a black dress with a low back that made several heads turn as Ella approached. She looked up with that perfect smile, the one that never quite reached her green eyes. "There you are. You look beautiful, darling." Ella slid into her seat. "Thanks. You too." Colin appeared from the direction of the bar, whiskey in hand, his expression the careful neutral he wore when orchestrating these events. He kissed the top of Ella's head and took his own seat. Ella kept her voice light, casual. "Is Rafe Cooper coming tonight?" Isabel's eyebrows lifted slightly. "The new investor? Is he invited?" Colin's jaw tightened just enough for Ella to notice. "He was notified. Whether he shows up is another question." He took a long drink. "Frankly, I'd prefer if he didn't." Isabel turned in her seat, studying Ella with sudden interest. "You've met him, haven't you? What's he like?" Ella reached for her water glass, using the motion to buy herself a second. "A bit full of himself, cold, you know the type." The words came out too fast, too practiced. Isabel's expression shifted, something knowing flickering behind her eyes before the polished mask returned. "How intriguing." Ella lifted one shoulder in what she hoped looked like indifference. "He's just strange. That's all." Colin stood and moved toward the stage, signaling the start of the evening. His opening speech rolled out with practiced ease, gratitude for hard work, acknowledgement of success, promises for the future. Applause rippled through the crowd. The orchestra began a gentle jazz piece as servers appeared with the first course. Ella was halfway through her salad when Isabel's voice cut through the music. "Who just walked in?" Every head at their table turned toward the entrance. Rafe Cooper stood in the doorway in a black suit that fit him like it had been engineered specifically for his frame. The cut of it emphasized shoulders that needed no emphasis. He scanned the room with that cold, calculating gaze, and then his eyes found their table. Found her. Ella's breath caught before she could stop it. She turned back to her plate too quickly, felt heat creeping up her neck. "Well," Isabel murmured, "he's certainly striking." "That's Rafe Cooper," Ella managed, keeping her eyes fixed on her salad. Rafe moved through the room like water through stone, inevitable, unstoppable. Conversations paused as he passed. By the time he reached their table, Colin was already standing, hand extended, professional smile locked in place. "Rafe, good to see you." "Wouldn't miss it." Rafe's handshake was brief, controlled. "The company's first Crowstone event since my investment. Had to be here." He turned to Isabel, and something in his expression softened just slightly. When she offered her hand, he took it with old-world grace and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a gesture that should have looked theatrical but somehow came across as entirely natural. "Mrs. Jones, I presume?" His voice carried that same low warmth it had held at the pool. "I've heard quite a bit about you, all of it falling well short of reality." Isabel's smile turned genuine for just a moment. "Oh? What have you heard?" "That you're formidable." His eyes held hers, clearly an understatement. Colin's expression darkened by degrees. Ella lifted her wineglass to her lips and tried to look anywhere else. Rafe leaned down, his voice dropping to something meant only for her. "Hello again. You look beautiful tonight, Ella." She turned, meeting those ice-blue eyes, despite every instinct screaming at her to look away. Her smile felt like plastic, stretched too thin. "Mr. Cooper, please." Isabel gestured to the empty chair beside Ella. "Join us." "Thank you." Rafe settled into the seat with fluid ease, close enough that Ella could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I appreciate the welcome." The conversation shifted into polite territory, Isabel asking questions about family, marriage, work, Rafe answered with perfect charm, offering just enough information to satisfy curiosity while revealing nothing substantial. Ella listened without speaking, watching the way he moved, the careful control in every gesture. So he can be warm when he wants to be. The thought arrived with unexpected bitterness. Isabel paused mid-sentence, her gaze sharpening as she studied Rafe's face. "Mr. Cooper, I don't believe we've met before, but there's something very familiar about you." She tilted her head. "Your voice, maybe, or the way you carry yourself. I can't quite place it." Rafe's smile didn't waver. "I get that sometimes. Perhaps I remind you of someone you used to know." Isabel's face went very still. For 3 seconds she didn't blink, didn't breathe. Perhaps, but the color had drained from her cheeks. Before anyone could say more, James Donalds appeared beside the table, all easy confidence and white teeth. He offered Ella his hand. "You promised me the first dance. Tell me you didn't forget." Ella stood, grateful for the escape. "Of course not." She let James lead her onto the floor, but her eyes stayed on the table, on Rafe, who watched her go with an expression she couldn't read. The orchestra shifted into something slower. James's hand found her waist. They moved through the basic steps while he talked about quarterly reports and expansion plans, words that washed over her without leaving any impression. Because Rafe had turned to Isabel, was offering his hand, was pulling Colin's wife onto the dance floor with a smooth request that Colin couldn't refuse without looking petty. Ella watched them move together, watched the way Rafe held Isabel with perfect propriety, his hand at her back, hers on his shoulder, close enough to speak privately. She saw his lips move near Isabel's ear, saw Isabel's eyes widen. "Ella," James's voice pulled her back. "You all right?" "Sorry, yes. Just distracted." On the other side of the floor, Rafe's voice carried a dangerous gentleness. "Jasmine, and vanilla, if I'm not mistaken. Your perfume." Isabel's step faltered for half a beat. "You have a good nose?" "It suits you." He guided her through a turn. "You've worn it a long time, haven't you?" Her throat worked. "Since I was young. I've tried others, more expensive ones. But this one—" She trailed off, searching his face. "This is going to sound crazy, but do you have a brother? Someone who looks like you?" "Why do you ask?" "Because you remind me of someone." Her voice dropped even lower. "Someone who mattered." Rafe's expression remained perfectly neutral. "Was he special? This person you're thinking of?" Isabel's face went pale. "Very." "But you're here with Mr. Jones." His voice carried something sharp beneath the silk. "So I suppose he wasn't that special after all." Isabel stopped moving. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing." His smile turned apologetic. "Forgive me, I overstepped." He glanced toward where Ella danced with James, their movements stiff and formal. Then back to Isabel. "May I cut in, Mr. Donalds?" James blinked, caught off guard. "Oh, I suppose—" Rafe turned to Isabel with a slight bow. "Thank you for the dance, Mrs. Jones." He took her hand, pressed another kiss to her knuckles, and passed her smoothly to James before either of them could protest. Then his hand found Ella's waist. His other hand closed around hers. The world narrowed to the 6 inches of space between them. "You're being unusually social tonight, Mr. Cooper." Ella's voice came out steadier than she felt. "This isn't your usual style. You have preconceptions about me." His thumb traced a small circle against her palm. "I'm still trying to recover from our unfortunate first meeting." "You seemed very interested in my sister-in-law." The words escaped before she could stop them. "Do you know Isabel from somewhere?" I asked the second most beautiful woman at the table to dance. His eyes held hers, since the first was already spoken for. Heat flooded her face. She forced herself to hold his gaze. "What are you playing at?" His expression shifted, something dangerous flickering behind the ice. "What do you mean?" "You make Colin nervous. You show up here acting like—" She stopped, searching for the right words. "Why do I feel like I should be worried about you?" Rafe's hand at her waist pulled her closer, just an inch, barely perceptible to anyone watching, but enough that she could feel the solid heat of him through the thin silk of her dress. He lifted his free hand and brushed back a strand of hair that had fallen across her forehead. His fingers lingered there for half a second too long. "I don't know, Ella." His voice dropped to something rough and raw. "You tell me." His hand tightened at her waist, drawing her body flush against his. Her pulse hammered against her throat. "I don't trust you." The words came out breathless. Rafe leaned down until his lips nearly touched her ear. "But I trust you more than anyone else in this room." Her lips parted, their eyes locked and held, seconds stretching into something that felt infinite and impossible. "I need to sit down." She pulled away, turned, and walked back to the table with her heart pounding so hard she was certain everyone in the ballroom could hear it. Colin's eyes tracked her approach, his expression tight with questions he wasn't asking out loud. Ella sank into her chair and reached for her wineglass. Rafe settled beside her with infuriating calm. "Lucky me. I got to dance with the two most beautiful women here tonight." Colin's smile had edges. "Actually, the luckiest man here would be me, since those two beautiful women are my life." The two men looked at each other across the table, smiles fixed in place, eyes calculating, something dangerous humming in the silence between them. Ella drained her wine in 2 swallows and glanced between her brother and the man sitting too close to her. Something was happening here, something she didn't understand. Isabel's hands trembled as she reached for her wine, that perfume comment. Noah used to say the same thing, exactly the same thing. "Jasmine and vanilla. It suits you, Isa." But Noah was gone. Colin never talked about him. She watched Rafe move toward Ella, the way he talked to her, the way he held himself. God, even his posture. No, impossible. She thought. 15 years. And ghosts don't come back. 6 a.m. came cold and grey. Ella stood at her hotel window watching the sky darken, feeling like her skin was too tight for her body. She'd spent the night replaying the gala, Rafe's hand burning through the silk at her waist, his voice in her ear making promises he hadn't spoken out loud, those ice-blue eyes holding hers like he was memorizing something he planned to keep forever. She couldn't think straight anymore. She needed to move, to breathe, to stop seeing his face every time she closed her eyes. The stables sat at the far edge of the estate, all weathered timber and stone, smelling of hay and leather and horses shifting warm in their stalls. The groom looked up when she entered, weathered hands pausing mid-brush on a chestnut mare's glossy flank. "Morning, Miss Jones?" His gaze drifted past her toward the windows, where the sky pressed dark and heavy against the glass. "Planning to ride this morning?" "Just a short loop through the woods." Ella ran her palm along the mare's neck, feeling solid muscles shift beneath warm coat. "I need to clear my head." The groom's eyes narrowed as he studied the horizon through the stable doors. Black clouds massed over the tree line like something gathering strength, moving fast, eating up what little blue remained. "Weather's turning, Miss Jones." He reached for the saddle with the kind of efficiency that came from 40 years of mornings exactly like this. Hour at most before she breaks. Maybe less. He cinched the girth tight and checked the stirrups. "Keep it short. Half hour, no more. You'll want to be back before the sky opens up." "I will. Thank you." She swung into the saddle and the mare moved beneath her with easy, familiar rhythm. Gravel crunched under hooves as the estate fell away behind her, growing smaller, quieter, until all she could hear was the mare's breathing and the wind picking up in the trees. 2 floors above, Rafe Cooper stood on his balcony with coffee he hadn't touched, going cold in his hand. He'd been awake since 5, watching the weather roll in, watching those black clouds build over the western horizon, watching the wind strip leaves from branches and send them spiraling across the courtyard below. Storm weather, the kind that gave no warning before it turned vicious. Movement caught his eye, a flash of cream coat and dark hair crossing the stone courtyard. Ella, heading toward the stables at an hour when the rest of the hotel still slept. He watched her disappear into the timber building, watched her emerge minutes later astride a chestnut mare. She sat the horse well, spine straight, hands confident and light on the reins, moving like someone who'd grown up riding. The mare broke into an easy canter, and they headed for the forest trail, growing smaller and smaller until the trees swallowed them whole. Rafe's gaze lifted to the sky. Those clouds were moving fast. Too fast. She'd be deep in the woods when the storm broke, and from the look of that sky it wasn't going to be gentle. His jaw tightened. He set the coffee down and went to find a horse. The forest opened ahead of Ella like welcoming arms, familiar territory from last year's retreat, the canopy thick enough to filter what little morning light remained. She'd ridden this trail before, knew where it curved, where it dipped, where the ground turned soft after rain. The mare's rhythm was soothing, almost hypnotic, and Ella let her mind drift free, away from Colin's worried glances that never quite asked the questions he wanted answers to, away from Isabel's careful observations that felt like being studied under glass, away from ice-blue eyes that saw too much and made her feel too seen. 30 minutes passed like breathing. She pulled the reins gently, turning the mare back toward the stables. The first drops hit her face, cold, heavy, deliberate. Not rain yet, but the promise of it, the warning. Then the sky cracked open, and the world disappeared. Water came down in sheets, brutal and blinding, turning everything into grey noise and zero visibility. The mare spooked hard to the left, and Ella fought for control as mud sucked at hooves and the trail became a river beneath them. Her coat soaked through in seconds. Her hair plastered to her face and neck, cold seeped into her bones with vicious efficiency. She couldn't see the path anymore, couldn't see anything beyond 3 feet of rain-hammered air. Fear spiked sharp in her chest. Then, through the downpour, a shape, dark, angular, half swallowed by undergrowth and decades of neglect. A hunting cabin. Ella dismounted on shaking legs and stumbled toward it. The door was locked, but the wood had gone soft with rot. She kicked it once. Pain exploded through her ankle as something gave way and the door crashed inward. Inside smelled of damp earth and mouse droppings and years of abandonment. She tied the mare's reins to a post under the narrow overhang and limped across the threshold, ankle throbbing with every step. The interior was almost pitch black. No furniture except 2 broken chairs listing against the far wall, a stone fireplace caked with old soot, cobwebs hanging thick in the corners. Her phone sat useless in her pocket. No signal this deep in the woods. Colin was going to lose his mind. Ella peeled off her soaked coat with fingers gone clumsy from cold. The sweater came next, heavy and dripping, hitting the floor with a wet slap. She stood there in her bra and riding pants, shivering so hard her teeth chattered, and crouched before the fireplace, trying to gather kindling with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. Some of it looked dry enough to burn. If she could just get her fingers to work, if she could just... Outside, thunder rolled across the sky like the world breaking in half. She was about to cry when the door crashed open. Rafe Cooper filled the doorway, water streaming from his dark hair down the sharp planes of his face, white shirt plastered to his chest like a second skin. His eyes found hers through the gloom, and something in his expression shifted. Relief and anger and something else she couldn't name, all fighting for space behind that ice-blue gaze. He crossed the space in 3 strides and pulled her against him. "Come here." His voice was rough, urgent, and his hands were already on her arms. "Let me warm you up." Ella's breath hitched against his chest. "You're soaked too." He was already stripping off his shirt. Water dripped from his shoulders as fabric hit the floor, revealing the landscape of him. Lean muscle carved sharp beneath skin, the ridge of his stomach, dark hair trailing down below his navel and disappearing into his waistband. And scars. White lines crisscrossing his ribs like someone had tried to carve a map into his skin. A puckered circular mark near his collarbone, old bullet wound, she realized with a jolt. Something that looked like a knife slash below his left shoulder blade, thick and raised and deliberate. Her eyes caught on them before she could stop herself, tracing the evidence of violence written into his body like a language she couldn't read. What happened to this man? Rafe moved past her to the fireplace, all controlled efficiency and zero wasted motion. He grabbed one of the broken chairs and snapped off a leg with his bare hands like it was kindling, then another. Wood splintered under his grip like paper. He pulled something from his back pocket, a lighter, waterproof, expensive, and crouched before the hearth. Flames caught, grew. Light spilled gold across the cabin, pushing back the dark. He turned back to her, firelight carving shadows into the hard angles of his face. "Your pants, take them off, you're soaked through." Ella hesitated, arms wrapped around herself. "Hypothermia doesn't care about modesty, Ella." His eyes held hers without wavering, without apology. "We need to get your core temperature up, or you're going to crash." His voice gentle just slightly. "I've seen naked women before. This isn't the time for shame. Come here." Her fingers found the button at her waist, hesitated one more second, then obeyed. The wet denim peeled away with effort, clinging to her thighs, leaving her standing in just her underwear, white lace soaked transparent and clinging to every curve. Rafe's gaze swept down once, clinical and quick and completely controlled, then snapped back to her face. He settled on the floor in front of the fire and held out his hand. She took it. He pulled her down between his legs, her back against his bare chest, and wrapped his arms around her. His body was solid and radiating heat behind her despite the rain, and when his hands began rubbing her arms, slow, firm strokes meant to chase the cold from her skin, something in her chest cracked wide open. "What were you thinking?" His breath stirred the damp hair at her temple, voice rough with something that might have been fear. "Riding out in weather like this? I needed to clear my head." Her voice came out smaller than she wanted, and she hated how vulnerable she sounded. "I didn't think the storm would come so fast. I saw you leave." His hands kept moving along her arms, patient and methodical, generating friction and warmth. "Watched the weather turn. I knew it would break." She twisted slightly in his arms, trying to see his face. "You came for me?" "Yes." Her pulse kicked hard against her throat. "Why?" His lips curved against her temple. Not quite a smile, something more rueful, almost self-mocking. "How else am I supposed to get you to forgive me?" His breath was warm against her ear. "You've been angry at me since the day we met." They sat like that while the fire grew and rain hammered the roof with relentless fury. She could feel every point where their bodies touched. His chest solid against her spine, his thighs bracketing hers, warm and strong, his breath steady against her ear, his arms wrapped around her like he had no intention of letting go. Awareness crept through her like heat through water, slow, inevitable, impossible to stop or ignore. The shivering stopped, but the trembling didn't. Ella turned her face to the side, angling her head so she could see him properly. Not just the hard line of his jaw or the profile carved in firelight. She wanted his eyes. She shifted more, twisting in the cage of his arms until she could see them fully, those ice-blue eyes. The firelight reflected in them turned frost to flame, ice to heat, and when they met hers, something electric passed between them. "You don't seem like a good man, Rafe Cooper." His breath stirred against her temple, and she felt his chest rise and fall against her spine, slow, controlled, like he was measuring each breath. "I'm not." The admission came without hesitation, without apology, and something in her chest tightened at the brutal honesty of it. "But you came for me?" "Yes." His arms tightened fractionally around her. "I care about you, Ella." Her pulse hammered. "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it, raw and unguarded. "Why do you care about me?" Rafe was quiet for a long moment, and she felt the tension in his body, the way his muscles had gone still, the way his breathing had changed. "In all the ugliness of this world." His voice dropped lower, rougher, like the words were being pulled from somewhere deep. "You're the only thing that's real, that's pure." His thumb traced a slow line along her forearm, and she felt the touch everywhere. "You remind me of someone I used to know. Once." Her breath caught. "Who?" His arms tightened around her just for a second, just enough that she felt it. "Someone who's dead now." The weight of those words hung between them, heavy and final, and carrying decades of grief she couldn't touch. Ella swallowed against the tightness in her throat. "If you're not a good man—" Her voice wavered. Why do I feel safe right now? Because I would never hurt you. The words came out fierce, certain, like a vow he was carving into stone. Have you hurt people before? Something dark moved behind his eyes, something ancient and violent and unrepentant. Rafe buried his nose in the curve of her neck, breathing her in like she was oxygen he'd been denied. The gesture was intimate, possessive, and Ella's stomach muscles contracted hard. Heat that had nothing to do with the fire flooded through her body in waves. Yes. The word was spoken against her skin, and she felt it more than heard it. I have. His lips brushed the sensitive spot just below her ear, and her breath stuttered. And I will again. The declaration should have terrified her, should have sent her scrambling away from him, should have tripped every warning bell her brother had spent 24 years installing in her brain. Instead, heat pooled low in her belly. Ella's fingers came up to touch the scars she'd seen earlier. She shifted slightly, bringing herself more upright, turning so she could see them better in the firelight. The raised white line across his collarbone, the puckered circle near his ribs. What happened to you? Her voice was barely above a whisper. These scars, what are they? I was thrown into hell once. His voice had gone rough, stripped down to gravel and smoke. Things you don't even want to hear about, Ella. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone with aching gentleness. Do you understand? Why does everyone treat me like I need protecting? Frustration bled into her voice, sharp and sudden. She turned fully now, shifting to her knees between his legs so she could look him in the eye. I'm not that fragile. Rafe's hand remained on her face, and his expression softened just slightly, something that might have been admiration flickering behind the ice. Colin cares about you, deeply. His thumb continued its slow path along her cheek. He doesn't let anyone near you, does he? Then what would make him angriest? The words escaped before she could think better of them. Knowing I'm here with you right now. Something dangerous flickered across Rafe's expression, something dark and pleased and absolutely ruthless. His hand slid from her face down to her throat, not pressing, just resting there like a brand. Probably. Ella held his gaze and refused to look away, even as heat crept up her neck. Why don't you like him? Rafe's eyes narrowed slightly, but his hand remained gentle against her throat. What makes you say that? It's obvious. She searched his face, looking for truth in the shadows the firelight carved. I can see it. The way you look at him, like there's history. He was silent for 3 heartbeats, his gaze going somewhere distant, somewhere she couldn't follow. Ella took a breath and offered her truth first, hoping he'd meet her halfway. Colin and I grew up in foster homes, in the system. Her voice softened as she spoke, remembering hallways that smelled like industrial cleaner and nights when nobody came even when you cried. My parents died when I was 2. Car accident. I don't remember them at all. She swallowed against the old ache. Colin was 18 when it happened. Old enough to age out of the system, but not old enough to take custody of me, so I spent 6 years in different homes, different families who didn't want me, different faces who didn't stay. As she spoke, Rafe's hands moved on her arms, not rubbing for warmth anymore, just touching her, grounding her. But his gaze had gone somewhere else entirely, somewhere far away. 20 years passed. A boy walking out of a children's home with nothing but the clothes on his back, and 2 other kids who'd become brothers because blood didn't matter when you were all trying to survive. Nights when nobody came, even when you were scared. Days spent figuring out how to eat, how to find work, how to stay alive when the system spit you out and told you good luck. Learning to trust the ones who stood beside you because they were the only family you'd ever have. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Ella didn't notice. She was lost in her own memories, her own survival story, and she had no idea she was describing his life too. Ella continued, needing him to understand. So it wasn't easy, and nobody should think I'm some delicate, fragile girl who needs wrapping in cotton wool. Her voice strengthened. I survived, on my own, until Colin finally got on his feet and brought me home, with Isabel. Rafe's gaze came back to her face, and something in his expression had gentled. "You're stronger than they give you credit for. We're good people who survived hard things, Rafe Cooper." She placed her hand over his where it rested on her arm. "Aren't we?" His smile turned bitter, and he pulled her closer, his arms wrapping fully around her again, bringing her back against his chest. His lips found her temple, pressed there for a long moment. "Evil finds its moment, Ella." His voice was barely above a whisper, and she heard old wounds bleeding through every word. "No matter how good you try to be." She twisted in his arms to see his eyes better. Those impossible blue eyes with fire dancing in them, turning ice to heat. This close, she could see every detail, the faint scar bisecting his left eyebrow, the exact moment his pupils dilated, the way his breath caught when she looked at him like that. Her fingers came up to trace the line of his jaw, feeling the rasp of stubble beneath her touch. "What are you doing?" The question came out rough, almost pained. She held his gaze, and her heart hammered so hard she was certain he could feel it. Every instinct screamed at her to pull back, to think this through, to be careful. "I don't know." But she did. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was choosing him, choosing this, choosing to stop being the girl everyone protected and start being the woman who made her own decisions. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. Soft, tentative. A question wrapped in surrender. Rafe went perfectly still beneath her, every muscle locked, every breath held. Then his hand came up to cradle the back of her head, fingers threading through her damp hair, and he kissed her back with a gentleness that made her chest ache. When they pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers, and his breathing had changed, deeper, less controlled, like something inside him was coming unmoored. "You should stay away from me, Ella." "I know." Her fingers traced down his neck, feeling his pulse hammer beneath her touch. "But I can't." His thumb brushed across her lower lip, and his voice dropped to something dark and raw. "Why not?" "Because I've been angry at you all week, and I still couldn't stop thinking about you." The confession spilled out before she could stop it. "Why is that?" "Maybe because I've been thinking about you too." His hand tightened in her hair. Every second, every breath. Ella pressed her lips to his neck, tasting rain and smoke and salt and something uniquely him. His head fell back, exposing his throat, and a sound escaped him, low, masculine, almost like surrender. Her fingers traced the old scars on his chest, the deep cuts, the raised tissue, the evidence of violence written into his body. She kissed his shoulder, his collarbone, the hollow of his throat. Some instinct had taken over, something primal and irresistible. The last thread of his control snapped. Rafe's mouth crashed into hers. Not gentle this time, not asking permission, taking, claiming. His hands gripped her waist and lifted her into his lap properly, her thighs bracketing his hips, and when she gasped against his lips, he deepened the kiss until rational thought became impossible. Heat flooded through her in waves, liquid and molten and completely overwhelming. Every nerve ending sparked to life at once. Her body arched against him instinctively, seeking more contact, more pressure, more of everything. She felt him, hard beneath her, unmistakable even through the thin fabric separating them, and the knowledge sent electricity racing down her spine. His lips left hers to trail down her jaw, her throat, the hollow of her collarbone. Each touch sent fire across her skin. Her hips rocked against him without permission from her conscious mind, and the groan that tore from his throat made heat coil tight and desperate in her belly. Rafe's hands moved, one sliding up her spine, while the other gripped her hip, holding her against him, and Ella felt herself coming apart at the seams. This was nothing like she'd imagined. This was drowning and burning and falling all at once. His mouth found her breast through the thin lace, and she moaned, raw, unguarded, shameless. Her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, and she felt him smile against her skin. "God, Ella!" His voice was gravel and smoke and barely controlled violence. "Stop. If you don't stop right now, I won't be able to." But she couldn't stop. Didn't want to stop. Her body had taken over, moving against his like it knew something her mind hadn't caught up to yet. Rafe's hands found her face, tilting it up so their eyes met. His pupils were blown wide, only a thin ring of blue remaining around the black. His breathing was ragged, chest heaving beneath her palms. "This can't happen like this." The words came out broken, desperate. Ella went still. Her head dropped forward, and shame flooded through her chest, hot and sudden and humiliating. She tried to pull away, to climb off his lap, to escape the mortification burning through her. Rafe's arms locked around her. "No, don't go. Stay, just a little longer." His voice had gone rough, almost desperate. "Even if I want you." He pressed his forehead against hers. "I can't have you. Not like this. Do you understand?" He kissed her shoulder, gentle and achingly tender, and Ella bit down hard on her lower lip to keep from crying. "Ella." Her name on his lips was a prayer and a curse all at once. He couldn't say anything else. But when she looked up and met his eyes, she saw the truth written there. Saw him fighting himself. Saw the war between what he wanted and what he believed was right. "What if I want to?" The words came out barely above a whisper. "Your hormones are talking right now." His thumb traced her jawline. "You'll regret this later. I know you will." He reached past her to check their clothes, using the distraction to put space between them. "Still wet. We'll need to stay here a bit longer." Outside, rain continued to hammer the roof and beat against the windows with relentless fury. The storm showed no signs of breaking. Ella sat in his lap in nothing but her white lace underwear and just looked at him, held his gaze, refused to look away. Every nerve in her body was screaming, every cell aligned toward wanting him. Rafe went very still, his breath caught in his throat. She leaned closer, her lips barely grazing his ear. "You don't know what I can handle yet." Something broke behind his eyes, the last wall crumbling, the final thread snapping. His hands found her waist and pulled her against him with sudden, desperate force. This kiss was different, harder, hungrier, like something inside him had finally broken free and couldn't be caged again. Ella trembled in his arms, not from cold this time, but from want so sharp it bordered on pain. Rafe's mouth left hers, his forehead pressing against hers. His breathing was ragged, his entire body trembling with the effort of holding back. "Are you sure?" His voice was barely recognizable. "Ella, are you sure?" She tangled her fingers in his hair and pulled him back so their eyes met, held his gaze without wavering. "Don't stop." The words came out raw, desperate. Her voice broke on them. "Rafe, please don't stop." This wasn't supposed to happen. Not like this. She was supposed to be leverage, a weapon, Colin's soft spot, nothing more. Take her, ruin Isabel. Make Colin watch as everything he loves slips away. That was the plan, but somewhere between the rain and the fire, between her trembling lips and her whispered trust, the plan had started to crack. Because the way she looked at him, eyes wide, vulnerable, completely his, it wasn't strategy anymore. It was real, and he was taking something from her he could never give back. Her innocence, her trust, her first time. All of it under false pretenses, because she didn't know who he really was. She didn't know this was revenge. She thought this was love. And God help him. So did he. "Rafe." Her voice broke on his name, and something inside him shattered. He was a man built from revenge and lies. He was Rafe Cooper, master manipulator. He was someone who'd worn this face for 10 years, a ghost in borrowed skin. But in this moment, with her body against his and her heart in his hands, he was just a man who'd fallen for the one person he was supposed to destroy, and there was no going back from this. He closed the final distance between them, knowing he was taking her down a path with no way back. Ella gasped, pain and pleasure mingling in a sound she'd never made before. "Feel me," Rafe whispered against her ear, his voice rough and broken. "Feel what you do to me. Let yourself fall, Ella." His hands guided her hips in a slow, deep rhythm. Their breathing grew ragged, mingling with the sound of rain. Their bodies moved together in the firelight, and Ella heard herself making sounds she didn't recognize, soft moans, desperate gasps, his name torn from her throat like prayer. Rafe's lips found hers one more time, and against her mouth he whispered, "You're mine now, Ella. Mine." She shattered in his arms, and when the world slowly came back into focus, she knew it was true. Colin Jones learned 2 things within 15 minutes that made his hands shake. First, Ella had taken a horse into the forest that morning. Second, Rafe Cooper had followed her. 3 hours later, neither of them had returned. He stood at the window of the lodge's main room, watching rain hammer the glass with enough force to rattle the panes. The storm had rolled in fast and vicious, the kind that turned dirt roads into rivers and made even 4-wheel drives useless. The groom had told him the trails were impassable. No one could get through until it broke. Colin's reflection stared back at him from the dark glass. His tie hung loose around his neck, his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He'd been pacing for the last hour, checking his watch every few minutes like that would somehow make time move faster. Isabel appeared beside him with 2 glasses of scotch. She pressed one into his hand, and her fingers lingered on his wrist. Warm, steady, deliberate. "Stop worrying." Her voice was silk over steel. "She's not alone. That's better than the alternative." Colin took a long drink. The burn did nothing to ease the knot in his chest. "I don't like that man." "Mr. Cooper?" Isabel tilted her head, blonde hair catching the lamplight. "Why not? I don't trust him." Colin set his glass down harder than necessary. "And if he touches my sister—" "Colin!" Isabel's hand moved to his back, rubbing slow circles between his shoulder blades. "Ella's a smart girl. I don't think she's particularly fond of Mr. Cooper either." But even as she said it, something shifted behind her green eyes. Her gaze drifted to the window, to the rain sheeting down in silver curtains, and her thoughts went somewhere Colin couldn't follow. Rafe Cooper was dangerous. Not just in the obvious ways, the money, the power, the cold calculation that lived behind those ice-blue eyes. No, he was dangerous because he looked at people like he could see straight through to their bones, past the lies they told themselves, down to the truth they tried to bury. And Ella had already fallen into his orbit. Isabel could see it at the gala, the way her eyes kept finding him across the room, the flush that crept up her throat when he got too close. Just like Isabel's own thoughts kept circling back to him, no matter how hard she tried to stop them. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to glowing embers. Rafe kissed Ella slowly, thoroughly, like he was memorizing the taste of her. When he finally pulled back, his thumb traced her lower lip, and his eyes held something she'd never seen before. Tenderness wrapped in possession, hunger tempered by restraint. "Ella." His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "No matter what happens, don't forget that you matter to me. That this—" He stopped, jaw working. "That this was real." The way he said it made her chest tighten, like he was giving her something precious and fragile, something that cost him to say out loud. "Why are you telling me this?" She searched his face for answers he wasn't ready to give. His fingers moved through her damp hair, gentle and deliberate. "I just need you to remember." He reached for her sweater, now mostly dry, and held it open so she could slip her arms through. His movements were careful, almost reverent, buttoning each button like it mattered, smoothing the fabric over her shoulders. When he knelt to help her with her pants, his hands steadied her when she wobbled on her sore ankle. "Does it hurt?" His eyes found hers. She shook her head slowly. "No. Not anymore." Rafe dressed quickly, then moved to the window. Rain still fell, but the fury had gone out of it, more drizzle than downpour now. He checked the fire. Dying. They'd need to leave soon anyway. "The hotel's about 30 minutes away." He turned back to her. "Storm's breaking. I think we should take our chances." He led his horse out of the lean-to and swung up into the saddle with fluid grace. Then he reached down for her. Ella took his hand and felt herself lifted effortlessly, settling in front of him with her back against his chest. His arms came around her to grip the reins, caging her in warmth and safety. They left the other horse behind. It would find its way back. The drizzle was cold against Ella's face as they rode through the trees, but Rafe's body behind her was solid and warm and utterly steady. Each movement of the horse pressed her closer to him. She could feel his heartbeat against her spine, slow, calm, controlled even now. She felt like she was in love. The thought hit her with the force of a physical blow, stealing her breath. 2 weeks ago she'd hated this man, hated his arrogance, his coldness, the way he looked at her like she was something to be solved. Now she'd given herself to him in a firelit cabin while rain battered the roof and the rest of the world disappeared. What happens now? The question circled her thoughts like a vulture. When the man who'd infuriated you becomes the man you've fallen for, the man you've surrendered everything to, how does life move forward? Colin was going to lose his mind. They emerged from the tree line, and Ella's stomach dropped. Colin stood at the hotel entrance with 2 men beside cars, clearly preparing to search. She could see the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his hands curled into fists. Rafe's arms tightened around her, his lips brushed her ear. "Let me handle this, Ella." Colin spotted them and started forward, his voice carrying. "Ella!" Relief and fury warred in his tone. "Thank God! Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Colin." She kept her voice level. "Calm down." Rafe dismounted first, smooth and unhurried. Then he reached up and lifted Ella down, his hands steady on her waist. Colin's eyes tracked every second of it. The moment her feet touched ground, Colin pulled her into a crushing hug. Over his shoulder, Ella caught the flash of anger in his eyes as they locked on Rafe. "Rafe came for me," she said quickly. "I would have frozen without him." Colin pulled back, still gripping her shoulders. His eyebrows shot up. "Rafe!" The single word came out sharp, disbelieving. His eyes narrowed, the way they always did when he caught her in something. Heat flooded Ella's face. Rafe's voice stayed calm. "I saw her leave, checked the weather, and knew the storm would hit. Found an old cabin, made a fire, waited for the rain to ease." "Thank you." Colin's jaw was tight. She was lucky to have someone older with her. "Colin!" Ella's voice sharpened. Rafe's expression didn't change. "Ella's not a little girl, Colin. She's strong enough to handle herself." "Yeah." Colin's smile didn't reach his eyes. "We saw that." Colin's hand found Ella's elbow with bruising force. "I need to talk to my sister. Excuse us." He pulled her toward the hotel entrance. Ella threw one look back at Rafe before Colin yanked her inside. The door slammed shut. Isabel had been standing near the entrance watching. Now she moved forward. Her heels clicked on wet pavement as she approached Rafe. "That was very thoughtful, Mr. Cooper, going after her like that." Her voice was warm honey with poison underneath. "Colin worries about Ella because she's inexperienced with certain types of men." She glanced toward the hotel. "Especially the dangerous ones." Her gaze slid back to Rafe, lingering on his face. "But you don't seem afraid of danger, do you, Isabel?" His voice dropped lower, intimate. "In fact, I'd say you might enjoy it." Isabel's breath caught, her pupils dilated. "Have a pleasant day," Rafe said softly, then turned and walked away. But as he moved across the gravel drive, his mind wasn't on the hotel or the storm or even Colin's rage. He was thinking about Ella's eyes when she'd surrendered to him. The trust there, the wonder, the absolute certainty. And he was thinking about Isabel's green eyes watching him just now, calculating, remembering, suspicious, the past and the future tangled like barbed wire, and Rafe couldn't see a way to protect Ella from the vengeance he'd spent 15 years building. But God help him, he was going to try. Colin pulled Ella into his study and locked the door. "Sit," Ella's jaw tightened. "Colin, I'm not a child. Sit." His voice cracked like a whip. She sat. Colin paced, hands shaking. Finally he turned. 3 hours. You were alone with him for 3 hours. We were in a cabin, in a storm. Did he touch you? Colin's eyes were wild. Ella, did that man put his hands on you? Heat flooded her face. He saved my life. That's not what I asked. Colin moved closer. You're different. Since you came back. Something changed. Ella's heart hammered. Nothing changed. You called him Rafe. Colin's voice dropped dangerously low. Not Mr. Cooper. Not the investor. Rafe. She swallowed hard. That's his name. 3 hours ago you hated him. Colin crouched in front of her chair, gripping the armrests, caging her in. What happened in that cabin, Ella? Her eyes stung. Why do you care? You control every part of my life already. Who I talk to, who I work with, where I go. You won't even let me breathe without permission. Because I'm trying to protect you. From what? She stood, forcing him back. From living? From making my own choices? Colin's face went pale. You don't understand the world, Ella. You don't know what men like him are capable of. Men like him? She laughed without humor. Or men like you? The words hung between them like shattered glass. Colin stepped back as if she'd slapped him. What's that supposed to mean? Ella's hands trembled. I'm not stupid, Colin. I see the way you operate. The way people are afraid of you. The way you crush anyone who gets in your way. She met his eyes. You're not protecting me from dangerous men. You're protecting me from becoming like them. Ella, but maybe it's too late. Maybe I already have. She walked to the door. Stay away from him. Colin's voice was barely audible. Please, I'm begging you, stay away from Rafe Cooper, from Rafe. Ella turned, hand on the doorknob. Why? Give me one good reason. Because I love you, he finally said. And I can't lose you. Ella's expression softened, but only for a moment. Then stop trying to own me. She left. Colin stood alone in the room, staring at his hands. They were still shaking. Sunday afternoon, Ella caught him leaving through the hotel lobby window. Rafe climbed into the back of a black Mercedes, Max holding the door open. Then the car pulled away into the grey drizzle, taillights disappearing around the curve. No goodbye, no text, nothing. She stood at the window long after he'd gone, something cold settling in her chest. What did I do? Years of keeping everyone away, and she'd given herself to him in a fire-lit cabin while the world disappeared, and he hadn't called, hadn't even looked for her. She pressed her palm against the glass. Not heartbreak. She wouldn't let it be heartbreak. Monday morning, Ella drove to work through grey traffic with her coffee cooling in her hand. The elevator opened on the executive floor, Colin's office on the left, hers beside it, Rafe's at the far end. He was there. Through the glass walls, she could see him at his desk, laptop open, perfectly composed in a charcoal suit. He looked up as she passed, those ice-blue eyes finding hers through the glass, and something flickered across his expression before the professional mask returned. He nodded once, polite, distant, like she was any other employee. Ella's chest tightened, but she kept walking. Morning! James appeared at her shoulder with his trademark grin. Meeting in 5. She nodded, but her mind stayed on that brief eye contact. One nod. That's all you get. Later that morning, Colin knocked on Rafe's office door and entered without waiting, files under his arm. Rafe looked up from his laptop, perfectly calm. Colin. Williams Construction, Thames Development, Riverside Partners. Colin dropped the folder on the desk. 3 subcontractors threatening to walk because you haven't paid them. 2 weeks, Rafe. Rafe opened the folder, scanning the invoices. I found irregularities. Materials costs don't match market rates. These are contractors we've used for years. Then perhaps you've been overpaying for years. Rafe closed the folder. I'll authorize once they resubmit accurate figures. Colin's hands curled at his sides. This is the 4th time this month. Our reputation is suffering. Then they should be reassured we have an investor who actually reviews numbers. Something sharp flickered behind Rafe's eyes. "I'm protecting my investment, something you should appreciate." The words hung between them, polite on the surface, poison underneath. "What are you really doing here?" Colin's voice dropped. "What's your actual game?" Rafe tilted his head, almost amused. "I'm a businessman managing his portfolio." "Bullshit." Colin leaned forward. "You're sabotaging us, deliberately." "That's a serious accusation." Rafe's voice stayed level. "Do you have proof?" Colin stared at him, trying to find words for the certainty in his gut. But proof? He had nothing except instinct and the nagging feeling that those ice-blue eyes had looked at him this way before. Somewhere in a past, he'd spent 15 years trying to forget. Rafe turned back to his laptop. "Get those invoices resubmitted. I'll review them when the numbers make sense." Colin grabbed the folder and walked out, shoulders rigid with anger he couldn't release. Later, Colin sat alone in his office and dialed. "Tim, I need a complete background check on Rafe Cooper. Everything." "The investor, we already vetted him, but you're deeper," Colin cut him off. "I want to know where he came from. Every deal, every connection. There's something wrong about this man." "That'll take time. I don't care what it costs. Just find me something." He ended the call and stared at the empty doorway. Something about those eyes felt familiar, but that was impossible. Noah was gone, 15 years, and men like him didn't survive that long without connections. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Nice office, Colin. You've come far since 2011. His blood turned to ice. Another message appeared, but you know what they say about climbing too high. Colin's fingers shook as he deleted both messages, then checked 3 times to make sure they were gone. This had to be spam, some random phishing attempt. He was being paranoid, but deep in his gut, in that part that had kept him alive through years of dangerous choices, he knew better. Something was coming, and he'd invited it in himself the day he signed Rafe Cooper's investment contract. Outside his window, London moved and lived, unaware that somewhere in its towers and shadowed streets, the past was catching up with a man who'd spent 15 years running from it. This time, there was nowhere left to hide. That night, Isabel sat alone in the bedroom with whiskey burning her throat and an old photograph trembling in her hands. 3 faces smiled back from 15 years ago, Colin on the left, younger and leaner, Isabel on the right, and between them a dark-haired boy with his arms around both their shoulders. Noah Evans. She brought the photo closer to the lamplight, studying his face with an intensity that made her chest ache. Those ice-blue eyes were sharp and cutting, even in a frozen moment. The height, the way he held himself with that quiet confidence. Her hands shook harder as she recognized what she'd been trying not to see all week. Rafe Cooper had those same eyes, the same build, the same way of standing like gravity worked differently for him than everyone else. "No," she whispered to the empty room. "It can't be." But her hands shook harder as she poured another whiskey, the liquid sloshing over the rim and spilling onto the photograph. She wiped it away quickly, smearing the image, and something broke inside her. She remembered the orphanage in fragments, cold hallways and shared blankets, 3 kids who became family because blood didn't matter when you were all trying to survive. Noah had loved her since they were 12, quietly and patiently, waiting for her to notice him the way he'd always noticed her. She had noticed, God help her. The way he looked at her used to make her feel like the only girl in the world, like she mattered in a way nobody else had ever made her feel. But that night, the night everything changed. She'd made a choice between safety and love, knowing Noah would pay the price for it. Isabel's throat closed up as tears came before she could stop them, tracking hot down her face. She pressed the photograph against her chest and curled onto her side on the bed. "Damn you, Colin," she whispered. Her eyes drifted closed, whiskey and guilt dragging her under. If Rafe Cooper was who she thought he was, then everything made terrible sense. The investment, the cold politeness, the way he looked at Colin like unfinished business. Colin came home past midnight and found his wife passed out on top of the covers. The empty whiskey bottle told him everything he needed to know. Then he saw the photograph clutched in her hand. His blood went cold. He shook her shoulder gently. "Isabel, wake up." She stirred. eyes blinking open slowly. When she saw him standing over her, something crumpled in her expression. Colin sat on the edge of the bed with his back to her. "You're drinking again. I thought we were past this." Isabel pushed herself upright, the room spinning around her. "Colin?" Her voice cracked on his name. "What happened to Noah?" The question hung between them like broken glass. Colin didn't turn around. "You know what happened." Her fingers dug into the mattress. Tell me he's really dead." Colin's voice stayed flat and careful. "He died in prison, 5 years into his sentence." A sob caught in her throat before she could swallow it down. "Because of us." The words came out broken and raw. "We set him up, Colin." The word came out sharp when Colin finally spoke. "No, because of choices he made." "Colin." His hand came up, cutting her off before she could finish. "Stop. It's been 15 years, Isabel. The past is dead. Let it stay dead." Isabel grabbed her pillow and stood on shaking legs, steadying herself against the dresser as the room tilted. "Sometimes I hate you, Colin." She walked past him toward the guest room with the photograph still clutched in her hand. Colin sat alone on the bed and pressed his palms against his eyes, trying to block out the image of that old photograph and the ghost it carried. Noah had to be dead, because if he wasn't, everything Colin had built over 15 years was about to come crashing down around him. 3 days of silence turned Ella's hurt into something sharper. By Thursday evening she sat at her desk long after everyone had gone home, staring at the company directory until she found what she needed: Rafe Cooper's home address. A penthouse overlooking the Thames. Her hands shook on the steering wheel during the drive, but she didn't let herself think about what she was doing, or she'd lose her nerve entirely. 10 o'clock at night. She stood outside his door and pressed the bell before she could change her mind, listening to the lock click and watching the door swing open. Rafe stood there in grey sweatpants and a dark sweatshirt, his hair damp from a recent shower, barefoot and completely different from the man in tailored suits who'd haunted her thoughts for weeks. Surprise flickered across his face before his expression went carefully blank. "Ella." His voice came out rough. "I'm surprised you came to my home." Something inside her snapped at those words, and her voice shook with anger and hurt mixed together. "That's the first thing you say to me, after the cabin, after 3 days of silence, that you're surprised?" His jaw tightened as he swallowed hard. "I stayed away on purpose, Ella." "I noticed." A bitter laugh escaped before she could stop it. "Before the cabin I saw you everywhere, in the office, at meetings, watching me. And after, you avoided me like I was contaminated." She stepped closer, close enough to catch the scent of his soap. "You're running from me! You slept with me and now you're—" His hand shot out and caught her wrist, pulling her inside in one smooth motion. The door slammed shut behind them. "Come here." He backed her against the wall, his body crowding hers, one hand braced beside her head while the other stayed locked around her wrist. "You want to know why I'm running?" His mouth crashed into hers with a hunger that stole every thought from her head. Ella gasped, and he deepened the kiss until her knees went weak, his body pressed hard against hers. Heat bloomed low in her belly and spread through her like wildfire, burning away anger and leaving only desperate need. Her hand fisted in his sweatshirt, pulling him closer even as her mind screamed this was how he'd trapped her before, with his mouth and hands and the way he made her forget everything. He lifted her off the ground in one fluid motion and carried her to the kitchen island, setting her on the marble counter. His fingers worked the buttons of her blouse while his mouth traced fire down her throat. "Wait." The word came out breathless. "Rafe, wait." His lips found that sensitive spot below her ear, and she arched against him with a soft moan she couldn't suppress, every nerve ending lit up at once, logic short-circuited, leaving only hunger. "Stop." She pushed against his chest with both hands, real force behind it this time. "Rafe, stop." He froze, his hands stilling on her shirt, his forehead dropping to her shoulder. "If I mean anything to you at all," her voice shook but held steady, "you'll stop right now." He lifted his head and pressed his forehead against hers, eyes squeezed shut. "You mean everything to me, Ella." The words came out raw, more than you could possibly understand. "Then why are you running?" Tears blurred her vision. "Why did you disappear?" "Because I'm not who you think I am." Something desperate lived in his eyes. "I'm not the man you deserve." Her hands framed his face, holding him when he would have pulled away. "Then tell me who you really are." "It's not time yet." His thumb traced her cheekbone, wiping away a tear. "Soon. I promise, but not tonight." He stepped back and began buttoning her shirt with careful movements. When he finished, his hand smoothed her hair back from her face. "Max will take you home." His voice had gone quiet and controlled again. "It's not safe for you to drive like this." The dismissal stung worse than his absence had. Ella slid off the counter and walked to the door without looking back, afraid she'd break if she turned around. His voice stopped her at the threshold. "Ella." She paused with her hand on the handle, but didn't turn around. "I'm sorry." The words were barely audible. For all of it, she walked out and let the door close with a soft click. Max waited in the lobby with an umbrella. He opened the back door of the car without a word. "I can drive myself." Ella's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm fine." "Please, Miss Jones." His tone stayed gentle but firm. "Let me take you home. I'll have your car delivered to the office garage by morning." Something in his expression made her resistance crumble. She climbed into the back seat and pressed her forehead against the cool window as Max pulled into traffic. After several minutes of silence, Ella spoke. "Max, how long have you known Rafe?" Max kept his eyes on the road ahead for a long moment before answering. 10 years, miss." Her breath caught. "What was he like, before?" Max's jaw tightened. "Different. Lighter." He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You remind him of who he used to be, miss. That's why he's trying so hard not to hurt you." A tear tracked down her cheek, and she wiped it away. "He's already done that." Max's knuckles went white on the steering wheel, but he said nothing. Ella straightened. 10 years ago. Where was Rafe? What was he doing? Max's smile appeared in the mirror, sad and knowing. "That's information you'll need to get from Mr. Cooper himself, Miss Jones." "His family, then. Where are they?" Max's expression closed off and he said nothing, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. "How does someone that young have this much money?" The question came out sharper than she intended. Max's eyes met hers in the mirror. "Mr. Jones was quite wealthy at a young age, too, wasn't he? Made his fortune early." The comparison stopped her cold. Ella turned to the window and watched London slide past, her mind racing with fragments that didn't quite fit together, something just out of reach that she couldn't quite grasp. Whatever Rafe was hiding, whatever had happened 10 years ago to change him, she was done waiting for answers. She would find the truth herself. The car pulled up outside the mansion, and Ella climbed out, her mind still racing. "Miss Jones?" Max's voice stopped her before she could close the door. "Good night. When Mr. Cooper is ready, he'll call you." She turned back, caught off guard by the certainty in his tone. "Thank you, Max." He pulled away, and Ella stood on the front steps, pulling out her phone instead of going inside. She dialed Jamie Johnson, her best friend from high school who'd gone to MIT and now worked in government intelligence. 2 rings. Then Jamie's voice came through, bright and familiar. "Ella? Is that really you?" Ella kept her voice low despite being alone. "Hey, Jamie. I need your help with something." The warmth drained from Jamie's tone immediately. "What kind of help?" "Research." Ella's grip tightened on the phone. "I need you to look into 2 names, anything you can find in official records." A pause stretched across the line before Jamie answered. "What are the names?" Ella took a breath, bracing herself. "Rafe Cooper and Colin Jones." Jamie's breath caught on the other end. "Colin Jones? Your brother Colin?" The word came out steadier than Ella felt. "Yes." Jamie's confusion bled through the speaker. Ella, what exactly am I looking for here? Everything. Ella turned away from the mansion, lowering her voice further. Government contracts, business partnerships, anything connecting the two names. And Jamie? Check criminal records too, prison history, arrest records. She heard Jamie let out a slow breath. You're asking me to run a full intelligence workup on your brother. What's going on? Ella's throat tightened around the words. I can't explain right now. I just need to know the truth. Please. A long moment passed, and Ella held her breath waiting for the answer. Jamie's voice softened slightly when she finally spoke. 48 hours. But after this, you're buying me coffee and explaining everything. Relief flooded through Ella's chest and she closed her eyes briefly. Deal. Thank you. The line went dead and Ella lowered the phone, staring at the screen for a moment before turning toward the mansion door. She was so focused on her thoughts that she didn't notice anything unusual. In the darkness across the street, a man raised his camera and captured the images. Ella stepping out of the car, Ella on the phone in front of the house, Ella walking inside. He lowered the camera and murmured into the night. Colin Jones. I'll take what you love most, just like you took from me. Colin stood at his office window and watched the city below while his world collapsed in real time. The email had arrived first thing that morning, subject line simple and devastating. Docklands tender, regret to inform. He'd opened it with hands that already knew what was coming, reading the polite corporate language that boiled down to one word. Rejected. Financial instability concerns, they'd written, as if those 3 words could erase 18 months of planning and the £30 million he'd been counting on. His phone rang before he could process the loss, and the bank's tone was apologetic, but final. We're freezing your credit line, Mr. Jones. Recent developments in your company's financial position require us to reassess our exposure. Colin had barely ended that call when his computer screen refreshed and showed him the new reality. Crownstone Holdings stock down 18% in morning trading. His phone began vibrating with messages from contractors' lawyers, each one a variation on the same theme. Pay what you owe, or we file suit. He pushed away from the desk and began pacing, his chest tightening with each breath that wouldn't come deep enough. How did they know about the payment delays? Those were internal records, protected information that shouldn't have leaked beyond his accounting department. His mind raced through possibilities until one name stopped him mid-stride. Rafe Cooper, 25% partner with access to every file in the company, veto rights over major expenditures that he'd been using to slow down payments for weeks. The realization hit like ice water. Rafe had sabotaged them from inside and then somehow orchestrated the attack from outside. A knock at the door pulled Colin from his thoughts, and his secretary stepped in with an envelope in her hand. Mr. Jones, this was left at the lobby desk for you. No return address. Colin took the envelope with fingers that had gone numb, watching her leave before tearing it open. Photographs spilled across his desk. His vision tunneled as he recognized Ella in each one, walking up to the mansion at night, getting into her car in a parking garage, sitting at a cafe with friends, all taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. A note fluttered down onto the photos, handwritten in block letters that made his blood run cold. Once you took everything from someone, now someone will take everything from you. Red tinged the edges of Colin's vision, and fury burned hot behind his ribs as he grabbed the photos and stormed out of his office. His hands shook with barely contained violence while he moved through the hallway toward Rafe's office, every rational thought dissolving into white-hot rage. Rafe was approaching his office door from the opposite direction when Colin reached him. Colin's fist connected with Rafe's jaw before either of them could speak, the impact sending Rafe stumbling back against the wall. "You did this!" Colin's voice came out strangled with anger. "You're destroying my company, and now you're threatening my sister!" Rafe straightened slowly, touching the corner of his mouth where blood had appeared, his expression staying eerily calm despite the blow. "Don't blame me for your own failures, Colin." His voice came out cold and measured. "Your empire was built on sand, and it's finally sinking." Are you having Ella followed? Colin threw the photographs at Rafe's feet, the images scattering across the floor between them. What are these? What kind of sick game are you playing? Rafe's eyes went to the photos and something shifted in his expression as he bent to pick them up, his movements becoming less controlled as he flipped through the images. What is this? The question came out sharp and confused. Where did you get these? They were delivered to me today. Colin stepped closer, his voice dropping to something dangerous. If you touch her, if you go anywhere near her, I will kill you. Do you understand me? Colin. The voice made both men turn. Ella stood 10 feet away in the hallway, her face pale and her eyes moving between her brother and Rafe with growing horror. She walked forward on legs that felt disconnected from her body and bent to pick up one of the photographs from the floor. The image showed her leaving the mansion last night, captured in the moment she'd ended her call with Jamie. She looked up at Rafe and something inside her chest cracked open. You had me followed. Her voice came out flat and distant. All this time, you were watching me. Ella, no! Rafe's composure finally broke, and he took a step toward her with his hand reaching out. I didn't. Don't! The word stopped him cold. Don't come near me. She turned and ran. Ella! Rafe's voice followed her down the hallway, but she didn't slow down, her feet carrying her toward the stairs because waiting for an elevator was impossible when she couldn't breathe. Behind her, Colin's voice cut through the air like a blade. You won't take one step near her. Rafe started forward, but Colin blocked his path, and by the time he shoved past, Ella had already disappeared. Colin ran for the stairs and took them 2 at a time, his heart pounding against his ribs. But when he burst through the door into the parking garage, he was just in time to see Ella's car peel out of her spot and speed toward the exit. He stood there gasping for breath while his sister disappeared into London traffic, heading somewhere he couldn't follow. Inside her car, Ella's hands shook on the steering wheel as she pointed herself toward Jamie's office in Whitehall, needing answers more than she needed air. And Rafe, the man she'd given herself to, the man who'd made her feel things she'd never felt before. He'd looked at those photos with surprise in his eyes that could have been genuine or could have been the best performance she'd ever seen. She didn't know which possibility terrified her more. Ella burst through Jamie's office door without knocking. Did you find anything? Jamie looked up from her desk, something between concern and excitement on her face. I was about to call you. Information started coming through this morning. She gestured toward the empty chair. Sit down for this. Ella pulled the chair closer and watched Jamie's fingers move across the keyboard, pulling up files that had been buried for years. Okay, so I started with Rafe Cooper, like you asked. Jamie's voice took on the careful tone she used when delivering bad news. Here's the thing. There's nothing. No traffic violations, no school records, no family history, no medical files. Nothing. That's not possible. Ella leaned forward, scanning the empty search results on the screen. Everyone has some kind of paper trail. Exactly. Jamie clicked to another window. Which means either he's got someone very good scrubbing his records, or Rafe Cooper isn't his real name. She paused, her hand hovering over the mouse. But your brother, Colin Jones, he's got records. Ice water flooded Ella's veins as Jamie opened a file marked with official government seals and typed text that looked like it had been scanned from old police reports. 2011, warehouse heist. Jamie read the summary aloud while Ella's eyes raced over the details. 3 suspects arrested. Noah Evans, 25, Colin Jones, 24, Marcus Kane, 32, killed during arrest. She scrolled down to the next section. Colin testified against Noah Evans. Deal was made. Colin got 6 months in prison plus 2 years house arrest. Noah got 7 years. Ella's thoughts scattered like frightened birds, pieces of her childhood suddenly rearranging themselves into a picture she didn't recognize. Colin has a criminal record? Her voice came out hollow. From theft? That's why he couldn't take me out of foster care. The realization hit like a physical blow. He wasn't just building his company, he was trying to outrun his past. Wait, Ella pointed at the screen, her finger trembling slightly. Who is Noah Evans? Where is he now? Jamie clicked through several more windows before pulling up another file marked with a prison seal. He died in 2016. Prison fight at HMP Belmarsh. She turned the monitor toward Ella. Photo from his intake processing. The image loaded and Ella leaned closer to the screen. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts. Ice-blue eyes stared out from the photograph, cold and defiant in the prison mugshot. The face was younger, harder, but the bone structure, the jaw, the intensity in that gaze. Does Noah Evans have a brother? The question spilled out before Ella could think it through. Or any siblings? Jamie ran another search, her expression growing confused as results appeared. Both Colin and Noah have foster care backgrounds. She pulled up 2 files side by side. Same institution, St. Catherine's Home for Children in East London. She tapped where the addresses matched. They were there at the same time. Ella stared at the institution name, her mind racing through every conversation with Colin about their childhood, every careful deflection when she'd asked about the years before he'd gotten her out. What aren't they telling me? Her hands gripped the edge of Jamie's desk hard enough to make her knuckles go white, and she turned to look at her friend with desperation bleeding through every word. Colin, what else are you hiding from me? Rafe climbed into the back of the car. Jones' mansion, now. Max turned in the driver's seat, surprise crossing his face. Why would we? Ella might have gone home. Rafe's voice came out clipped. Drive. Max started the engine, but his eyes found Rafe's in the rearview mirror. What's wrong? Someone's been following Ella, taking photos. Rafe leaned forward. Colin got them this morning. Do you know anything about this? Max's pause stretched too long. Danny Kane. He's been investigating his father's death. Marcus Kane died during the warehouse arrest in 2011. His eyes stayed on the road. He might have reached out to Colin. Heat crawled up Rafe's neck and his fingers curled into fists. How long have you known? A few weeks. Max's voice stayed steady. We didn't think Ella would be in danger. She is in danger. Rafe cut him off, each word sharp. And I can't let her out of my sight again. His phone vibrated and Rafe looked down at the message. We need to talk. Regent's Park, Rose Garden, 1 hour, urgent. Isabel. Rafe stared at the words before turning his gaze to the window. 20 minutes later, the car pulled through the gates of the Jones estate. Empty driveway, no lights. Rafe dialed Ella's number. It rang twice before going to voicemail. He tried again, same result. His jaw tightened as he lowered the phone. She's not here. Take me to Regent's Park. Isabel was sitting on a bench in the rose garden when Rafe arrived, her hands folded in her lap like she was holding something fragile together. The late afternoon sun filtered through the climbing roses overhead, casting patterns of light and shadow across her face. Rafe walked down the gravel path toward her, and she lifted her head slowly, watching him approach. Her eyes were already red-rimmed, like she'd been crying before he got there. He sat beside her and waited. I used to come here with him. Isabel's voice came out barely above a whisper, her gaze fixed on the roses climbing the trellis in front of them. My first love. The boy I grew up with in that awful place. She pulled in a shaky breath. We'd sit on this exact bench and talk about getting out, building something real together. Rafe stayed silent, watching the way her fingers twisted and untwisted in her lap. But one night Colin came to me. Her voice cracked and she had to stop, swallowing hard before she could continue. The night before the warehouse job, Noah's plan. Brilliant, but dangerous, like everything he did. A tear slipped down her cheek and she didn't bother wiping it away. Colin said Noah would leave me eventually, that men like him always leave, that I deserved someone stable, someone safe. Why are you telling me this? Rafe kept his tone flat, emotionless. Isabel turned to look at him, and something desperate moved behind her eyes. Don't you know? When he didn't answer, she looked away again, her shoulders curving inward like she was trying to protect herself from her own words. I didn't think he'd die in there, and then when he did, her voice dropped to something hollow. For 10 years I've lived with what I did. The guilt never stops. Everyone kills the one they love. Rafe stood, looking down at her with eyes that had gone cold and distant. "I'm sorry you lost him, Isabel." He took a step back, and his voice came out quieter but no less cutting. "But you're not safe anymore. Colin's empire is falling apart, and you're going down with him unless you get out now." Isabel's breath hitched, and fresh tears spilled over, running down her face in streams she couldn't stop. Rafe's jaw tightened as he delivered the final blow. Love takes courage, real courage, not the kind that runs when things get hard. He paused, letting the words sink in. Cowards don't know how to love, they only know how to survive. He turned and walked back down the gravel path, his footsteps crunching against the stones, while Isabel sat alone among the roses with 10 years of guilt crushing the air from her lungs. Rafe tried Ella's number for the 5th time and got her voicemail again. He lowered the phone, his knuckles going white. "Max, Danny Kane's address. Now." Max glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "You think he's watching her?" "I'm not taking chances." Rafe's eyes stayed fixed on the window. "We make sure he can't get near her." Meanwhile, across London at Crownstone Holdings, Colin's world was collapsing in real time. His secretary burst through the door, her face pale. "Mr. Jones, HMRC officials are downstairs. They're demanding to inspect our financial records. They have warrants." Colin's stomach dropped. Tax authorities meant investigations, audits, public scrutiny. "Tell them I'll be down in 5 minutes." "They said now, sir." Colin pushed past her into the hallway. Crownstone's stock was crashing, contractors were filing suits, and now the government was digging through his books. But none of it mattered if he couldn't find Ella. He tried her number again and heard her voicemail message for the 10th time that hour. He texted, "Where are you? Please call me. Urgent." The message showed as delivered, but she hadn't read it. Colin headed for the elevator, ignoring his secretary's protests. The company could burn. He needed to get home. 20 minutes later, the mansion felt too quiet when Colin walked through the door, his pulse hammering and sweat cooling despite the winter air. "Ella?" he called out, his voice echoing off the marble floors. Movement in the living room caught his attention, and he turned sharply. Isabel stood beside the couch in a black coat, 2 leather suitcases at her feet. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and when she looked at him, something final moved behind her expression. Colin's brain struggled to process what he was seeing. "Isabel, where's Ella?" Isabel's gaze dropped to the suitcases without answering. Colin followed her line of sight, and confusion twisted into something colder. "What are those? Where are you going?" She walked toward him slowly and reached up to touch his face, her fingers trailing along his cheek, with a gentleness that felt like goodbye. "Our relationship was built on lies and guilt from the very beginning, Colin." Tears gathered in her eyes but didn't fall. "You promised me safety, stability, a secure life." Her hand dropped back to her side. "I gave up Noah for that. We killed him, and now the ghosts won't leave us alone." Her voice hardened slightly. "When you look at Rafe Cooper, what do you see?" Colin stepped back from her touch, his jaw tightening. "Don't be ridiculous. Rafe Cooper is dangerous, connected to people who don't play by any rules. He's trying to destroy everything I've built." "What did you find out about him?" Isabel's laugh came out bitter and sharp. "He's taking your company. He took your sister. He's taking everything, piece by piece." She tilted her head, studying his face. "And he has no past, does he? No records, no history, nothing." Something cruel flickered across her expression. "He came to destroy us, Colin." Colin's hands curled into fists at his sides. "No," he said, his voice hard. "He won't take you too. I won't let him." "Look into his eyes." Isabel's voice dropped to something almost pleading. "Really, look. Don't you see him? Don't you see Noah?" "You're talking nonsense." Colin grabbed her shoulders before she could say more, his grip tight enough to bruise. "Guilt is making you see things that aren't there. We'll get through this. We always do. Together." His voice cracked. "I love you." Isabel pulled free from his hands with a strength he didn't know she had. "It's too late for that." She picked up both suitcases, her movements steady despite the tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I can't stay with you anymore." Without another word, she turned and walked toward the door. Colin lunged after her, desperation overriding pride. "Isabel, don't go, please." His phone rang, the sound cutting through the air like a knife. Colin froze with his hand outstretched toward Isabel's retreating back, his phone vibrating insistently in his pocket. He pulled it out with shaking fingers and saw his secretary's name on the screen. The word came out as a snarl. "What?" His secretary's voice was barely above a whisper on the other end. "Mr. Jones, you need to come back right now. They're seizing everything." The apartment door gave way with one solid kick from Max's boot. Rafe stepped inside and the smell hit him first. Stale food, unwashed laundry, desperation. The studio was small and filthy, clothes scattered across furniture, take-out containers piled on every surface. But the wall made his blood run cold. Photographs covered it floor to ceiling, pinned up like evidence in a murder investigation. Colin leaving his office building, Isabel shopping on Bond Street, Ella everywhere, walking to her car, entering the mansion, sitting at a cafe with friends. Rafe moved closer, and his chest constricted when he saw the red marker circling Ella's face in the most recent photo. The caption underneath read, "Soon." His phone was in his hand before he realized he'd moved, fingers flying across the screen. "Tell me your location now. You're in danger. Don't go anywhere alone." The message showed as delivered but not read. Rafe turned to Max, his voice coming out rough. "We're going to Crownstone. I need to be there when Colin's world burns down." Across London, Ella pulled into the underground parking garage at Crownstone Holdings and cut the engine with shaking hands. Everything Jamie had shown her kept playing on repeat in her mind. Colin's criminal record, Noah Evans' prison photo with those ice-blue eyes that haunted her, the warehouse heist that had destroyed lives 15 years ago. Her brother had lied to her about everything, and Rafe, whoever he really was, had inserted himself into their lives with surgical precision, taking Colin's company piece by piece while drawing Ella closer with every calculated touch. She grabbed her bag and stepped out of the car, her footsteps echoing off concrete walls as she headed for the elevator. She needed answers, and she needed them now. She'd confront Colin first, then find Rafe and demand the truth. Behind her, 50 feet back in the shadows between parked cars, a figure watched her walk away. Danny Kane's lips moved in a whisper meant for a ghost. "Dad, the day's finally come. The man responsible for your death is going to pay." He followed at a distance, his footsteps silent against the concrete, as Ella disappeared into the elevator, completely unaware that danger was walking right behind her. Ella found Colin in Rafe's office, tearing through desk drawers with manic desperation, papers scattered across the floor, files dumped in piles, his movements frantic and uncoordinated like a man trying to find something that didn't exist. He spun around when the door opened, and his face crumpled with relief. "Ella!" He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, his grip almost painful. "Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you for hours." She pushed against his chest until he loosened his hold. "Colin." Her voice came out steady, despite the chaos spinning inside her head. "Tell me about the past, the heist, Noah Evans." She watched his face change, watched the color drain away. "Why didn't I know about any of this? And what does Rafe Cooper have to do with it?" Colin released her and stepped back, running both hands through his hair. Through the glass wall behind him, Ella could see HMRC officials moving through the office floor with boxes, employees standing in clusters, whispering, everything falling apart in real time. "What's happening, Colin?" She gestured at the chaos beyond the office walls. His laugh came out broken, edged with something that sounded like madness. "We're going under, Ella. Because of him. Rafe Cooper." He met her eyes, and she saw the depths of his desperation. "And Isabel left. She's gone." Ella tried to process it all, her brother's criminal past, a dead man who looked like Rafe, a company collapsing, a marriage ending. None of it made sense. Colin reached for her again and pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her like he was trying to hold the last solid thing in his universe. "But I'll always keep you safe." His voice broke. "Don't worry. I promise." The door slammed open behind them. "Ella!" Rafe's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Why didn't you answer my calls? I told you that you're in danger." Ella pulled away from Colin and turned to face him, every muscle in her body coiling tight. She crossed the space between them in 4 steps, and her hand connected with his face before she could think it through, the crack of the slap echoing off the walls. "I don't know who you are." Her voice shook with fury and something that felt too much like betrayal. "But I'm sure you're not who you pretended to be. Stay away from me." Rafe's hand came up to his reddening cheek, but his eyes never left hers, something desperate moving behind that ice-blue gaze. "Ella, please. I told you to stay away from my sister." Colin's voice turned dangerous as he moved to stand beside Ella. "Who are you really? What do you want from us?" Rafe's eyes shifted past Colin's shoulder and his entire body went rigid. "Get down!" Ella saw it in the same instant, a young man stepping through the doorway behind Rafe with a gun raised, his face twisted with rage and tears streaming down his cheeks. The gunshot shattered the air, Rafe's body slammed into Ella, and they hit the floor hard, his weight driving the breath from her lungs. The world tilted sideways, sound distorting into something underwater and far away. A second shot rang out, then silence, thick and suffocating and wrong. Ella lay pinned beneath Rafe's body, her face pressed against his shoulder. She turned her head and found herself staring into those ice-blue eyes inches from her own, watching something fade behind them. "Ella," he whispered, and the sound barely made it past his lips. Panic clawed up her throat, and she shoved against his chest, rolling him to the side. That's when she saw the blood, so much blood spreading across the front of his shirt, soaking through the fabric, pooling on the floor beneath him. The bullet had gone through his back and torn through his chest. "Rafe!" The scream ripped out of her, raw and animal. Across the room, Danny Kane lay crumpled against the wall, with Max standing over him, gun still raised. The young man wasn't moving. Colin's hands grabbed Ella's shoulders, trying to pull her up. "Ella, come on. We need to get out of here." She wrenched herself free from his grip and dropped to her knees beside Rafe's head, her hands hovering over him, without knowing where to touch. Where wouldn't hurt him more? Rafe's eyes found hers one more time, his lips forming words that took everything he had left. "Ella, I love you." His eyes closed, and his body went still. 3 days. Ella sat on the floor of her apartment surrounded by papers, legal documents, bank statements, bills she had no idea how to pay. Her hands pressed against her temples, trying to hold together a mind that wanted to fracture into 1,000 pieces. Colin had been arrested that morning. Money laundering, tax evasion, charges that would put him away for years. The company was gone, seized by the government and creditors. Isabel had disappeared without a trace. And Rafe. Heaviness settled deep in her bones when she thought his name. He'd been in a coma for 3 days. The bullet that went through his back and tore through his chest had missed his heart by inches. But the doctors wouldn't promise anything, and she wasn't allowed to see him because she wasn't family, wasn't anything to him except the woman he'd taken a bullet for. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing tears across her cheeks. The doorbell cut through the silence like a knife. Ella pushed herself up on shaking legs and walked to the door, her body moving on autopilot. When she opened it, Max filled the doorway with his quiet presence. "I came to take you somewhere, Ella." His voice carried something that might have been sympathy. Hope flared bright and painful in her chest. "To Rafe. Is he awake?" "No." Max's expression didn't change. "You can't see him, Ella. I'm sorry." He paused, his eyes holding hers with unexpected intensity. "But I'm going to show you who Rafe really is." An hour later, iron gates swung open and Max drove past security into grounds that seemed endless. The mansion rose ahead, all stone and glass. Inside, Ella's footsteps echoed against marble as Max led her through the entrance hall. Her throat tightened. "Am I safe here, Max?" "Safest place in the country, Ella." His voice carried absolute certainty. The living room opened before them. A fireplace dominated one wall, flames casting shadows across furniture and art. An elderly man stood beside the fire, watching her with eyes that had seen everything. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Come, sit." Ella's muscles locked before she forced herself forward, lowering into the leather chair, fingers gripping the armrests. "Who are you?" The man smiled, something almost kind crossing his lined face as he settled into his seat. "Ella, you got caught in the middle of a 15-year revenge." He paused. "But you deserved it least of all. Now you've got nothing left except a house and a car, and soon you'll be selling those too for Colin Jones' lawyers." Ella's throat went dry. "Why do you care?" "My name is Aidan Palmer." He leaned back, fingers steepled. "And I'm going to tell you a story. The one you've been wondering about." Ella nodded slowly, pulse throbbing in her neck. "I'm listening." Aidan's gaze drifted to the fire. "Once, I was young and broke. The work I did wasn't legal, but it paid. My world was ruthless." His voice dropped. "I had enemies. That's what happens when you climb from the gutter." Something like grief crossed his expression. "I fell in love. She got pregnant. She died giving birth." The words came out flat, but Ella heard the weight beneath them. "My world back then wasn't made for raising a baby. I was young, dangerous, targets on my back. So I gave the child to foster care and kept moving." Ella's breath hitched, but she stayed silent. "I got stronger, built an empire. Years later, I went looking for that child." Aidan's jaw tightened. Finding him proved difficult. Then someone hit one of my warehouses. £3 million, plus gold and artwork. His eyes shifted back to Ella, something cold flickering there. "The job went sideways. Police showed up and shot one of them dead. Marcus Kane, a career thief." He leaned forward. "The money meant nothing. I could replace it tomorrow. But the principle? Nobody steals from me without paying for it." Ella's head snapped up, her eyes going wide. "Wait, Marcus Kane?" Her voice came out sharp with recognition. Aidan's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Yes. Danny Kane's father." Ella's skin prickled, and she shifted in her seat. "We would have handled it ourselves, but the police got there first." Aidan's smile turned sharp. "Because one of the 3 robbers ratted out the other 2. Wanted all the money." He let that hang in the air. "When the cops caught them, they couldn't find the cash. Off-books money doesn't show up. They only knew about the gold and paintings, and they found all of it with one man." Aidan's eyes locked onto hers. "Noah Evans." Ella's stomach dropped. Noah Evans, Colin's childhood friend, the man Colin betrayed, the ghost whose face haunted her every time she looked at Rafe. Aidan smiled, but the expression held no warmth. Nobody knew there was a 4th person involved in that robbery. A young woman who wasn't at the warehouse that night but knew everything about the job. He paused, watching Ella's face. She knew, and she stayed silent. Ella's breath caught in her throat. "Isabel?" Aidan nodded slowly, his expression darkening. "The one who ratted them out took the money and started a business, built it from the ground up." His voice turned harder. "The career thief died, and Noah Evans went to prison. But when the police ran his DNA..." Something shifted in his expression. Something unexpected came up. "Noah Evans was my son, the child I'd been searching for all those years." The room tilted sideways and Ella gripped the armrests to keep herself steady. By then I'd become powerful enough to do something about it. But he was still a stranger, my blood, but unknown. I couldn't just pull him out and bring him home. Aidan leaned back, his gaze distant. "So I went to him. I got myself arrested on purpose and sent to the same prison. I wanted to know who my son had become." Ella's eyes widened, her mind struggling to process what she was hearing. Who was this man? What kind of power did he have to walk into a prison and back out whenever he wanted? The more time I spent with him, the more I saw myself. His mind, his courage, the way he carried himself. Aidan's hands moved restlessly, then stilled. I started being a father to him there, in that place. But one day things went wrong in the yard. A fight broke out, and by the time I got to him, Noah had been beaten nearly to death. Pressure built behind Ella's eyes, and she blinked hard against the tears trying to form. It gave me the perfect opportunity. I declared him dead. Aidan's eyes found hers again, cold and calculating. His face was destroyed from the beating. I had surgeons rebuild it, gave him a new identity, brought him into my empire, and stood beside him while he nursed that revenge burning inside him. Ella's hand flew to her mouth, muffling the sound that wanted to escape. Noah Evans was Rafe Cooper. She'd known the moment she saw that photograph. Those ice-blue eyes had already told her the truth, even when her mind refused to accept it. But there was one thing we didn't account for. Aidan leaned forward, his voice dropping. You, Ella. We never imagined he'd fall in love and change everything we'd planned. His smile turned sad. My son inherited his mother's heart. Love made him blind to everything else. A single tear slid down Ella's cheek, and she wiped it away with trembling fingers. Why are you telling me all of this? Aidan turned back to the fire, the flames casting shadows across his weathered face. When he spoke again, his voice carried something that might have been regret. Rafe might not wake up. The doctors can't promise anything, and you have decisions to make in the next few days. He stood slowly and walked to stand before her, looking down with eyes that had witnessed too much suffering. If Rafe were conscious right now, he'd make arrangements to ensure you never suffered any consequences from this mess, since he can't. Aidan's expression hardened. I'm here to offer you what he would have wanted. Colin Jones will stay in prison, 6 years minimum. You won't fight to get him out. Ella pushed herself to her feet, her legs unsteady beneath her. I can't do that to my brother. Aidan continued as if she hadn't spoken. The house and the company stay with you. I'm buying Crownstone in its current state and putting it in your name. Rafe wouldn't want you to lose everything because of what Colin did. I don't care about the money. Ella's voice came out stronger than she felt. I can't betray Colin. Aidan took 2 steps toward her and stopped, close enough that she could see the determination in his eyes. Dear girl, this isn't just about money. I admire that you'd sacrifice comfort and security for your brother, but there must be justice in this world, for the good and the bad alike. His voice dropped lower. Remember this. The deepest wounds, the worst betrayals, they always come from the people closest to us. And the person who commits betrayal, their greatest fear is looking in the mirror. He moved closer still, his presence commanding the space between them. Did you ever love Rafe? The question came out soft but unyielding. Ella nodded, unable to form words past the tightness in her throat. Aidan's expression softened for just a moment. Then the decision is yours. You know everything now. What you do with that knowledge, that's up to you. He turned away and started toward the door. Can I see him? Ella's voice cracked on the words. Can I see Rafe? Aidan paused and looked back over his shoulder. No. I'm taking him out of the country for better treatment. He held her gaze for one more second, then walked out, leaving her standing alone in the massive room. Ella's breath hitched and a sob broke free before she could stop it. The man she loved was dying, her brother was in prison, and she held the power to decide both their fates. 3 children who'd grown up together in children's home, Colin, Isabel, and Noah. They'd become each other's family when they had nothing else, and still they'd destroyed one another. Betrayal, greed, survival, whatever you wanted to call it. Noah had suffered the most. Rafe had suffered the most. Ella crossed to the large mirror hanging on the wall and stared at her reflection. Red-rimmed eyes, tear-stained cheeks, a woman standing at a crossroads with no good path forward. Behind her, the fire crackled in the silence. Who was she? Colin's loyal sister? Or the woman who loved Rafe Cooper enough to let him have his justice? The mirror offered no answers, only her own fractured reflection staring back. 1 year later, Ella Jones was sitting behind Colin's mahogany desk, running a company half its former size but honest now. James Donaldson had stayed, and together they'd salvaged what could be saved. Aidan Palmer had bought Crownstone and transferred ownership to Ella without conditions. Colin was serving 6 years. Ella visited Thursdays. Isabel had vanished to Paris, married a wealthy older man. They didn't speak. Ella sold the mansion and bought a Bloomsbury apartment. James proposed in March. She said no. Her heart belonged to a dead man. Max visited every few weeks with coffee, never staying long. They never mentioned Rafe Cooper's name. It sat between them like an open wound. Max had delivered the news 1 month after the shooting, his voice flat and hollow. Rafe Cooper had died in Switzerland, complications from the gunshot wound, internal bleeding, systems shutting down. Ella hadn't been allowed to see him, wasn't family, wasn't anything official. But every night before sleep claimed her, Ella closed her eyes and went back to that cabin outside London where rain had drummed against windows and firelight had painted shadows on bare skin. She remembered his voice, his hands learning her body like memorizing something sacred, the way he'd looked at her like she was worth everything. Her only photograph was the one Isabel had shown her, Noah Evans at 17. Ella kept it hidden in her nightstand drawer. The door to her office burst open that Tuesday morning, and James practically bounced through it, papers clutched in one hand and excitement written all over his face in a way that made Ella's chest tighten with caution. Ella. He crossed the room in 3 quick strides and spread documents across her desk with barely contained enthusiasm. We just got confirmation. We have a new investor, Covenant Group. They're huge, and they're offering terms that could take us to the next level. This partnership could mean expanding into European markets by next quarter. Ella set down her pen slowly, her mind catching on the name like a thorn. Covenant Group. I know what you're thinking. James leaned forward, his voice dropping to something more careful. I researched them thoroughly. They're powerful, part of the Palmer Group's umbrella of companies. Understanding bloomed slow and warm in Ella's chest, and despite everything, she felt her lips curve into something that might have been a smile. Her head shook slightly from side to side, and she murmured under her breath, barely loud enough for him to hear, So you're still helping me? Still offering your protection, Aidan Palmer? James's eyebrows drew together in confusion. What did you say? Nothing. Ella looked up and met his eyes with the professional mask she'd learned to wear like armor. When's the meeting scheduled? This afternoon, 2 o'clock. After James left, Ella stood at the window watching London move beneath her. Aidan Palmer's reputation was built on violence, his empire on broken rules and blood. But when everyone who claimed to love her had lied or hidden or run, he'd been the only one to stand beside her without asking for her soul in return. If he saw potential in partnering now, she wouldn't refuse based on reputation alone. 2 hours felt like 2 minutes. Ella checked her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The girl from a year ago didn't exist anymore, the one who'd believed in fairy tales and trusted too easily. This Ella had buried secrets and grief and built something real from ruins. Charcoal suit, sleek bun, eyes that had survived. She looked like someone who could run a company and make impossible choices. Ready. The conference room felt charged when Ella entered. James sat at her right, 3 managers around the table with folders and laptops. Ella smoothed her skirt, willing her pulse to slow. The door opened. Ella rose and moved toward the entrance as the first man stepped through. Tall, dark-haired, expensive suit. Ms. Jones, I'm David Chen, Covenant's CFO. He shook her hand with firm confidence and took his seat. Then Max stepped through and Ella's composure faltered. Tailored suit instead of his usual black, professionally styled hair. His eyes met hers, acknowledgement, apology, warning. Max. Her smile felt genuine despite confusion, and she extended her hand. He took it gently. Ms. Jones. Then, the third man entered and the world slowed. Ice-blue eyes found hers across the room, and the air left Ella's lungs in a rush that felt like drowning. She knew those eyes, had memorized every shade of blue they held, from winter frost to deep ocean, from cold indifference to heated possession. She knew that sharp jawline, those broad shoulders, the way he moved like violence barely contained beneath expensive fabric. Rafe Cooper stood 15 feet away from her. Noah Evans, Noah Palmer. Alive. Her lips parted, but her voice had abandoned her somewhere between shock and hope, and a fear so visceral she could taste copper on her tongue. Her body went perfectly still, every muscle locked in place, frozen between the urge to run toward him and the terror that he might disappear if she moved. He crossed the distance between them with measured steps, each one deliberate and controlled, giving her time to process what her eyes were showing her and her brain refused to accept. When he stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the faint scar above his left eyebrow, close enough to catch the scent of him, cedar and something darker, something that smelled like coming home, her knees almost gave out. "Hello, Ms. Jones." His voice was exactly as she remembered, and nothing like it at all, deeper somehow, rougher, like he'd spent a year screaming and had just learned to speak again. He extended his hand with professional formality that felt like a knife between her ribs. "I'm Noah Palmer, CEO of Covenant Group." Ella stared at his hand like it might vanish if she blinked, her own hand lifting without conscious permission. Her fingers trembled so badly she almost pulled back, but then his palm closed around hers and the world snapped into sharp focus with painful clarity. Warm, real, alive. "Hello." The word came out barely above a whisper, her throat too tight to manage anything louder. Tears burned behind her eyes and she blinked hard against them, refusing to fall apart in front of an audience. "Rafe or Noah or whoever you are." Her voice cracked despite her best efforts. "I'm so glad to see you again." Something shifted in those ice-blue eyes, the professional mask cracking just enough to let her see the man underneath, the one who'd taken a bullet for her, who'd whispered her name like a prayer in the darkness, who'd died and somehow found his way back. The corner of his mouth curved into the smallest smile, sad and tender and full of things he couldn't say with people watching. His hand tightened around hers and he pulled her forward gently, closing the space between them until propriety was a forgotten concept and all that existed was the two of them standing too close in a room full of witnesses who didn't matter. He leaned down, his breath ghosting across her ear, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for her. "I missed you, Ella." 4 words. 4 words that broke something open in her chest and let a year's worth of grief pour out all at once. Ella breathed him in, that scent she'd tried so desperately to remember in the dark, the one that never came back quite right in her dreams, and it was exactly perfect, exactly him, exactly what she'd lost and found and lost again. Her free hand lifted without permission, fingers trembling as they grazed along his jaw with feather-light touch, needing the tactile confirmation that he was here, real, solid, not another nightmare disguised as hope. His skin was warm beneath her touch, rough with barely there stubble, and when she pressed her palm flat against his cheek, he leaned into it like a man starving for contact. A tear slipped free and tracked down her face, hot and fast and impossible to stop. More followed, silent and unstoppable, a year of locked-away grief finding release. She wasn't alone anymore. Ella chose who to stand beside, knowing the cost and choosing him anyway. Thank you for listening to Ella and Rafe's story. This story is about more than just revenge and romance. It's about the impossible choices we face when the people we love hurt us the most. It's about whether justice matters more than loyalty, whether love can survive betrayal, and whether redemption is possible when built on lies. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe for more dark romance stories. Now here's my question for you. If you were Ella, would you choose Rafe and let your brother pay for what he did? Please tell me in the comments. I read every single one.